Chapter 25. That girl is also kind-hearted, but she has a hard life. Speaking of Shui Rulan, old grandma sighed again, and her face became gloomy. Grandma, have you talked to Aunt Shui? Qin Wanru inquired carefully. Your Aunt Shui, she can't overcome the barrier in her heart after all. Old grandma shook her head. In fact, she didn't know how to make it clear, because there was no evidence. Grandma, I'll go to persuade Aunt Shui. Qin Wanru said. You? Old grandma looked at the little granddaughter in front of her suspiciously. She still looked like a cute and naive child, which was not convincing at all. Yes, Grandma, just let me have a try. I like Aunt Shui. Qin Wanru took old grandma's hand and shook it for a few times in a spoiled manner. Her face became gloomy, and she said meaningfully, Mother doesn't seem to like me. I also want someone to love me. Feeling aggrieved, she bit her red lips. Her tender little face revealed a heart-wrenching sadness. Her big black eyes seemed to be dipped in ink, brimming with moisture and anticipation. It was really hard for one to reject her. Old grandma's heart was softened, and how could she not agree? Okay, then you can have a try. Grandma, then I'll go to find Aunt Shui now. Hearing old grandma's agreement, Qin Wanru stood up excitedly. Go. Old grandma said kindly. Grandma, I'll come to see you later. Qin Wanru bowed to old grandma, and saw old grandma nodded, and then turned to leave. This girl is also a poor girl. Madame D is so cruel that she wants to destroy this girl. No wonder this girl wants to find another elder to love her. Looking at Qin Wanru's back, old grandma sighed. She really felt sorry for this child. Madam is also for first miss. Nanny Duan made another cup of tea and said carefully. Can she exchange Zhuozhuo's reputation for Yuru? She didn't think that if it weren't for Zhuozhuo's father, Huayong wouldn't have survived. Huayong's father's life was exchanged for her own glory, splendor and wealth. Now she turns her back on him and wants Huayong's daughter to pay the debt for her daughter. Old grandma snorted coldly. She had long seen that Madame D treated Qin Wanru superficially. Whenever something happened to Qin Wanru's status would definitely be pushed back again and again. However, she used to think that Madame D only treated Qin Wanru with some material things. Old grandma thought that Madame D treated Qin Wanru a little and that she could not let her granddaughter suffer too much. Who would have thought that he would have such malicious thoughts this time? Madame has gone too far. Nanny Duan, who also knew Qin Wanru's background, could not help sighing at this time. He took a deep breath. Other people in the mansion also knew that the second miss was not Madame D's biological daughter, but they all thought that she was just an orphan picked up. They did not expect that it was the second miss's biological father who saved the general. Otherwise, it was the general who died at that time, and Ningyuan Army General's mansion would not have the current glory. It could be said that everything in the general's mansion now was won by the second miss's biological father at the risk of his life. Madame D should treat the second miss in this way, which was really vicious and heartless. If Zhuozhuo can persuade Rulan this time, no matter what, she must give Rulan a good position. Madame D really thinks that she has the sole power in the general's mansion. She can plot against whoever she wants, and she can do whatever she wants. Old grandma snorted coldly, and a trace of fierceness flashed in her eyes. As the official mother, it was not convenient for her to say something to Qin Huayong, so she could only watch Madame D pretend to be sympathetic, and it was not convenient for her to intervene too much. However, if this was really done by Madame D, then don't blame her for using the means of the official mother. The family temple was located in the northwest corner of the backyard of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. It was a very remote place, and no one would come on normal days. The so-called family temple was just a very small yard. Qin Wanru pushed open the half-closed door of the yard, and smelled the smell of smoke. She lifted the corner of her dress and walked in. She saw Shui Rulan's servant girl, Qianghua, was cleaning the yard. Seeing Qin Wanru coming, she put down the broom in her hand and saluted to Qin Wanru. Where is Aunt Shui? Qin Wanru looked around and asked. She is burning incense inside. Qianghua answered, I will inform Miss. Qin Wanru shook her hand. No, Qianghua, I have something to ask you. Second Miss, please. Qianghua said. That day, that night, where did you go? Shouldn't you be guarding Aunt Shui? Qin Wanru was not in a hurry to go into the room to persuade Shui Rulan, and asked. I don't know what I ate that day, and I got a stomachache. Miss saw that my stomach was not quiet, so she didn't let me guard at night. Qianghua lowered her head, and her eyes turned red. Her miss was so wronged now that she had to hide in the family temple. Qianghua felt that she had a great responsibility for not guarding her miss well. If she didn't have a stomachache that day, she wouldn't have left, and then when the general broke in drunk, she would have found and stopped him. Did you eat the leftovers of your Aunt Shui that night? Qin Wanru asked. Although the servant girls also had their own portion, the misses of aristocratic families did not use much. Moreover, the dishes were better than those of servants. The personal servant girls often used the leftovers of their misses. No, I didn't eat Mrs. dishes that day, and I used my own portion. Qianghua thought for a while, shook her head, and then explained, I didn't want to take my own portion that day, but Mrs. dishes were too little that day, so an old maid in the kitchen advised me to take my own portion, in case Mrs. dishes were too little and not enough to eat. Why did Aunt Shui's dishes were only enough for her? Qin Wanru caught the key keenly, and she could be sure that there must be something fishy about it. I also asked that day, and it was said that Miss didn't order many dishes today, and Madam also ordered the same dishes. After it was divided into 2 portions, it was naturally much less, and only enough for Miss, Qianghua said. It was such a coincidence that Aunt Shui ordered these dishes and Madame D also needed them. In fact, even if she needed them and divided them into 2 portions, it was impossible for each dish to be so little. It was such a coincidence that all the dishes were the same. Qianghua, you should know the old maid who advised you to take your own portion, right? Now go and find out who she is and what her background is. It should be no problem, right? Qin Wanru said. Second Miss, don't worry, I'll go now. Qianghua nodded and said. Qin Wanru let her leave, and turned into the middle room, which was the family temple in the mansion. There was a cold Buddha statue in the middle, and the incense burner in front of the Buddha statue was giving out clear smoke. A slim figure kneeling in front of the futon in front of the Buddha statue was chanting devoutly with her hands clasped together, as if she didn't hear the footsteps coming from outside. Aunt Shui. Qin Wanru whispered. The figure on the futon slowly turned around, and it was a beautiful woman in her 20s. Although she wore coarse clothes, she had a kind of reassuring gentleness. Aunt Shui. Qin Wanru's tears fell down. She hadn't seen Aunt Shui for a long time. In her memory, this gentle woman gave her a kind of motherly love that she lacked. It was she who protected her wholeheartedly. Even when she was pregnant and couldn't protect herself, she still tried to protect her again and again. The previous life slipped like a dream, and only this affection really existed. Wanru, what's wrong? Who bullied you? Come here and let Aunt Shui see why you are so aggrieved. Shui Rulan reached out to hold the table and stood up. Because she was anxious, she almost fell down. Qin Wanru hurriedly stepped forward to hold her. Smelling the familiar smell on her body, her tears fell down one by one. She suddenly hugged Shui Rulan and threw herself into her arms. Aunt Shui wasn't dead yet. She didn't die from premature birth. It was great. In this life, she must protect this poor woman. Being hugged by her, Shui Rulan almost fell down. Fortunately, there was an offering table behind her, so she staggered and stood firm. However, her waist was heavily hit, and she couldn't help frowning because of the pain. Feeling her body stiffen for a moment, Qin Wanru came to her senses. She hurriedly reached out to hold Shui Rulan and stepped back. She stretched out her hand to rub Shui Rulan's waist. Aunt Shui, are you hurt? No, Wanru is so weak. It won't hurt you. Seeing the girl's dark eyes with mist, Shui Rulan's heart softened. She reached out to pat her back and said softly, Aunt Shui is not so delicate. It's okay. This child was so beautiful and well-behaved. It would be great if she had such a daughter. However, even if she was not her daughter, Shui Rulan was willing to raise this child as her own. Is it really okay? Qin Wanru sniffled and said. What can happen? Of course, it's okay. Shui Rulan said with a soft smile. Aunt Shui, don't lie to me. If there is nothing, will you come here? Here, the house has been empty. How can it be used? Qin Wanru raised her head and looked at Shui Rulan. She knew that Shui Rulan had been living here these days, and even didn't allow anyone to visit her a few days ago. Here, is actually very good. It's very quiet. You know I always like quiet. Shui Rulan thought that it was better not to talk about that kind of thing with a child, so she changed the topic a little bit. No. It's not good here. Qin Wanru shook her head, wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and said firmly, Aunt Shui, let's leave here. Wanru, don't be angry. I think it's good here. If you miss me in the future, you can come here to see me. Shui Rulan thought that Qin Wanru was being childish again, so she coaxed her softly. Aunt Shui, someone wants to hurt us. Grandma and I need you. Qin Wanru looked at Shui Rulan and said. Her voice was so calm that it was not what a girl of her age should have. Her eyes flashed with bits of gold and sharpness, which made people feel inexplicably frightened and had to take her words seriously. Chapter 26. Shui Rulan was shocked to see her say such words with such a solemn expression and tone. She reached out to hold Qin Wanru's hand and led her to sit on a stool aside. She also sat down opposite Qin Wanru. Who wants to hurt you and my aunt? Aunt Shui has been in the family temple these days. Do you not care about the things outside and don't want Xianghua to report what happened outside to you? Qin Wanru asked. Aunt Shui wants to be alone these days. Shui Rulan's eyes drifted. Aunt Shui should know the marriage between Big Sister and Qi Tianyu. Big Sister wants to build connections with Duke Yong's mansion in the capital city. So my mother encouraged Nanny Fang to tell me that Qi Tianyu wants to marry me and asked me to marry him. She also said not to tell Qi Tianyu and to lift the veil to give him a surprise when we get married. Qin Wanru said calmly as if she was talking about other people's affairs. But the meaning of her words made Shui Rulan's face change dramatically. She was not the previous Qin Wanru, nor was she a child. She could see through many things. How can this be? Qi Tianyu must have taken a fancy to your big sister. When they were together in the past, Qi Tianyu and Yuru were quite affectionate. If you really marry him, Qi Tianyu must hate you for a lifetime. Not only hate me, but they also want to ruin my life. Qin Wanru lowered her head slightly and her eyes fell on the ground of the family temple. There was a sneer on her lips. In the last life, they did this and succeeded. Then what? Shui Rulan stared at Qin Wanru nervously and said in a trembling voice. Later, I found something wrong, so I asked someone to smash the bridal sedan chair and found the secret letters between Big Sister and the heir of Duke Yong. Then Qi Tianyu believed me. After the matter became serious, the two families had to break off the marriage. Qin Wanru said simply. Hearing that Qin Wanru was not really fooled, Shui Rulan was relieved. But on second thought, she immediately asked in surprise, doesn't your father know about this? Shui Rulan knew that Madame D was not very good to Qin Wanru. But she was just a person living in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. My father should also know. Qin Wanru raised her head, looked at Shui Rulan, and slightly bit her red lips. My father used to love me. He should not have agreed to such a thing. But this time, he looked at my mother and big sister's movements and did not say anything. Why? Shui Rulan looked angry. She felt that Qin Huayong was not that kind of person. They were childhood sweethearts and grew up together. If they had not been engaged, it would have been Shui Rulin who married Qin Huayuan. Aunt Shui, it's because of you. Qin Wanru looked at Shui Rulin and said nothing. Me? Shui Rulin was stunned and did not understand. Aunt Shui, don't you think it's a coincidence? The letter sent by Duke Yong's mansion should have arrived 10 days ago. After that, Aunt Shui had an accident and went to the family temple. After that, Nanny Fang encouraged me to say that the marriage was mine. She also said that Qi Tianyu liked me and wanted to marry me. She asked me to go to Grandma and cry. Big sister immediately came and agreed. Father just stood by and did nothing. Qin Wanru said slowly. The girl's voice was a little soft, which was particularly clear in this gloomy family temple. Every word was with some indescribable loneliness. Shui Rulin's face turned blue and then white. In the end, her eyes could not help bursting with anger. There were some things that were not said clearly, so she immediately understood. Madame D plotted against me. Shui Rulin suddenly stood up. She not only plotted against me, but also made your father feel guilty and even turned a blind eye to your affairs. The latter sentence was not a question but a direct affirmation. Thinking that her innocence had become a bargaining chip of Madame D, Shui Rulin could not control her anger at this time even though she looked like a gentle and quiet person. She liked to be quiet and gentle, but it didn't mean that she was meek. Not only was she not meek, but she was also quite hot-tempered when she was angry. At this time, she was so angry that she gritted her teeth. Qin Wanru also stood up, reached out to pull Shui Rulin's sleeve, and softly comforted her. Aunt Shui, don't be angry. When I was in the yard just now, I had asked Qianghua. She said that the dishes she ate that night were different from yours. Someone deliberately divided the dishes for you. This evidence was useless to others, but it was useful to Shui Rulin. It must be Madame D who did it. Shui Rulin now understood everything. Thinking that she was pushed into such a dilemma by Madame D, she was so angry that her lips trembled. Aunt Shui, if you plan to live like this, it will only make my mother happy, and in the future, no one will protect my grandmother anymore. You know that my mother has never liked my grandmother, and I'm afraid that my father will always feel guilty to my mother because of this. In the future, my mother may do whatever she wants. Qin Wanru looked at Shui Rulin and said softly with a flash of light in her eyes. I won't let her get what she wants. Shui Rulin said with hatred. After saying that, she pulled Qin Wanru and turned to go out. Let's go to see your father and ask him to give us an explanation. And let him see clearly Madame D's true colors. Qin Wanru grabbed Shui Rulin and said, Aunt Shui, wait a minute. My father won't believe it. Let Qianghua go to the kitchen to check. We can always get some evidence. Shui Rulin said. Miss, second miss, I'm back. Qianghua's voice suddenly came from outside the door. They turned back together and saw Qianghua coming in breathlessly. Have you found anything? Shui Rulin asked anxiously. No, the old maid in the kitchen also asked for leave. She said that she had something to do and went home. Qianghua gasped and shook her head. When did she leave? Qin Wanru was not surprised about this result. Madame D would not be so stupid to leave obvious evidence. On the second day after Mrs. Accident, she said that she had something to do at home and asked for a long leave. No one knew when she would come back. This old maid is not the old maid of Madame's dowry, but an ordinary old maid in our Ningyuan army general's mansion. Qianghua gasped and answered. She meant that they could not find anything. Madame D did it so flawlessly. Aunt Shui, don't be angry. Sit down first. Qin Wanru took Shui Rulin's hand and sat down on the stool again. She picked up the teapot on the table, poured a cup of water for Shui Rulin and pushed it in front of her. Aunt Shui, first of all, what will you do next? From then on, you will stay in the Buddha temple, no longer care about the things between me and grandma, and don't care about the thing that mother framed you this time? If she really stayed in the family temple quietly from then on and worshipped Buddha wholeheartedly, it meant that she would no longer care about the things in the mortal world, right or wrong, and would not care about it. Shui Rulin had been very confused these days. She didn't know what she was going to do, so she came directly to the family temple. In fact, she didn't know what she was going to do. Being forced by Qin Wanru, she couldn't say anything for a while. She picked up the tea at hand and took a sip, frowning tightly. Let me think about it again. Shui Rulin had not figured out what she wanted to do until now. What happened that night made her feel ashamed. That was the main reason why she hid in the family temple. She was so ashamed that she had no face to see others. That was the main reason why she hid in the family temple. If Aunt Shui thinks that you can really do this, then what I said today will be in vain. As for how mother will deal with grandma and me, or how mother will use this matter to force father to retreat, it has nothing to do with Aunt Shui. Aunt Shui just needs to be a quiet monk. Qin Wanru didn't allow Shui Rulin to escape at this time, so she provoked Shui Rulin again. Her words hurt Shui Rulin's heart. Shui Rulin was raised by old grandma since she was a child. Old grandma was like her biological mother to her. How could she bear to see old grandma being forced to that point by Madame D? What's more, Qin Wanru and Qin Huayong, whom she raised as her daughter, were also involved. The affection in their youth was still bitter when she turned it over again. I'm going to find her. After thinking it through, Shui Rulin said coldly, even a clay bodhisattva had a temper. Aunt Shui, you don't have to rush to find her. She will come to find you. Aunt Shui, just wait. Qin Wanru held Shui Rulin and said with confidence. Coming out of the deserted courtyard of the family temple, Qin Wanru went to the kitchen first. She picked a few hot and delicate snacks from the kitchen and put them on a small plate. She asked Qin Yu to carry a food basket and followed her out to Chuehua Gate. At the Chuehua Gate, she was stopped by the old maid who guarded the gate. My miss wants to find the general in the study. Qin Yu stood out and said loudly. Hearing her words, the old maid who guarded the gate did not dare to stop Qin Wanru anymore and made way for her. Although Madam said that Miss was not allowed to go out, she didn't say that Miss was not allowed to find the general. However, although the old maid let them go, she was still a little worried. When Qin Wanru walked out of Chuehua Gate, she hurriedly turned around and ran inside, ready to report to Madam. Qin Huayong's study was not far from the right corner of Chuehua Gate. In the past, he dealt with official affairs in the study. In order to go in and out conveniently, he deliberately set the study near Chuehua Gate. When Qin Wanru arrived at the study, Qin Huayong was working. Hearing that Qin Wanru came, he immediately nodded and let her in. Qin Wanru took the food basket from Qin Yu and carried it in herself. When she came to the study, she put the food basket on the table and bowed to Qin Huayong first. Qin Huayuan waved his hand, indicating that she didn't have to be so polite. Father, this is the new snack in the kitchen. I think it tastes very good, so I specially brought some for you. Qin Wanru stood up, took out a small plate from the food basket, and put it in front of Qin Huayong's table, and said with a smile. The pastry was very delicate. It was printed with a flower-shaped mold, and there were some red bean meat on it. The fragrance of the pastry had the fragrance of red bean, which was very pleasant. Qin Huayong looked at the flower-shaped pastry and was stunned for a while. Father, have a taste. Do you like it? Qin Wanru gently pushed the pastry to Qin Huayong's hand and said with a smile. Qin Huayong actually didn't like this kind of overly sweet and sticky food, but when he heard what Qin Wanru said, he unexpectedly didn't object. He reached out to take a piece, took a bite, and chewed it carefully. Father, is it delicious? Seeing that Qin Huayong really listened to her and took a piece to eat, Qin Wanru smiled with her eyes curved. It's very delicious. Although Qin Huayong tasted like chewing wax, when he saw the expectation in his little daughter's bright black eyes, he slightly smiled and nodded. Chapter 27. It's not very interesting. I was young at that time. Qin Huayong said bitterly. He found it more difficult to swallow the delicate cake in his mouth. Were you as young as Wanru at that time? Were you so immature? Qin Wanru became more and more curious. Father, tell me about you and Aunt Shui when you were young. What did you play at that time? It's been so long. I can't remember it. Qin Huayong actually didn't want to talk about those things. He felt guilty and sad when he thought of what happened a few days ago. Father, tell me about it. Next time I go to see Aunt Shui, I can also talk about these things with her. Maybe she will be in a good mood. I heard that recently Aunt Shui has moved to the family temple alone because she is in a bad mood. Qin Wanru said with a grievance. Seeing his little daughter's innocent look, Qin Huayong felt a little relieved even though he was full of worries. He sighed and put the cake in his hand on the plate. Your Aunt Shui was still young at that time. She looked gentle and quiet, but actually she was crazier than anyone else. What are the general and Wanru talking about? Why are they so happy? Madame D's raised voice suddenly came from the door. Qin Wanru looked back and found Madame D had come. Mother. Qin Wanru, who was smiling like a blooming flower, immediately looked like a frosted eggplant. She stood up, and the smile on her face was a little stiff. After bowing to Madame Duodi, she subconsciously leaned to Qin Huayong's side, looking a little timid. What are you doing here? Qin Huayong looked at his little daughter and Madame D's timid look and said unhappily. What do you mean by that, General? Wanru can come here. Why can't I come here as a mother? Is it because I disturbed the General's conversation? Madame D said sourly. Thinking of the vivid expression on Qin Huayong's face when she came in, she couldn't help feeling jealous and resentful. She had long suspected that there was something between Shui Rulan and Qin Huayong, but they were so tight-lipped and never revealed anything in front of her. Mother, Father and I were talking about Aunt Shui when she was young. Qin Wanru smiled softly and repeated the topic that made Madame D jealous. Father thought Aunt Shui was very cute at that time. The more Qin Wanru said so, the more Madame D felt that there was something going on between Qin Huayong and Shui Rulan. The jealousy and hatred in her heart seemed to grow and spread. She felt stuffy in her chest and could hardly speak. Mother, Father likes Aunt Shui. Do you like Aunt Shui too? Is it because you like to eat the same dishes as Aunt Shui that you have such a good relationship with her? Qin Wanru smiled and raised her eyebrows. It could be seen that she was in a good mood. Qin Wanru was in a good mood, which reminded Madame D of Qin Yuru who was crying just now. She felt a burning pain in her heart. The little girl who was supposed to be in trouble was not in trouble, but her daughter was in trouble. How could she accept this? Qin Wanru's mention of vegetables also made her heart tremble. This was a topic she was not willing to talk about. Smiling, Madame D pretended not to hear Qin Wanru's words and changed the topic. Let's talk about your Aunt Shui later. I want to talk to your father about what happened in Magistrate Chi's residence. Coincidentally, you are here. Miss Chi will be coming over tomorrow. You are the host, so you should accompany her more. Miss Chi was Qi Tianyu's sister, Lu Rongji. Lu Rongji was here. Qin Wanru sneered. Lu Rongji was not a good person. In her previous life, Lu Rongji and Qin Yuru were in cahoots. Not only did they torture her, but they also worked together to hurt her. She even had something to do with Lu Rongji. Qin Wanru couldn't breathe when she was cut in half. But she saw Lu Rongji smiling proudly in the crowd. She wanted to look for her. Since she was here, it was even better. Why would someone from Magistrate Chi come? Qin Huayong frowned. He didn't want to have any contact with Magistrate Chi now. She said that she thought what Qi Tianyu said that day was too much. She asked Miss Chi to come and apologize for the fact that Yuru was pregnant. First young Master Chi should have come by himself, but now they meet. I'm afraid it's not good. Madame D said implicitly. Why are they apologizing? We are the ones who should be apologizing. Qin Huayong said. General, what are you talking about? Since Magistrate Qi is so magnanimous, we have to show our magnanimity and solve this problem. Do you want to have a rift between you and Magistrate Qi because of this? Madame D smiled as she knew what Qin Huayong wanted to hear. What are you talking about? Sure enough, Qin Huayong's face softened when he heard her words. It was not easy for him to make Magistrate Qi not pursue this matter. It would be better if he could treat her calmly. It's Sister Rongji. That's great. Sister Rongji used to have the best relationship with Big Sister. She has always said that she wants to be a family with Big Sister. She will definitely comfort Big Sister when she comes. Qin Wanru smiled in surprise. If Magistrate Qi wanted to marry Qin Yuru's family, it meant that Magistrate Qi had long wanted to marry Qin Yuru. But now, Qin Yuru had made such a mess because of her engagement with the capital city. Qin Huayong's face darkened again. She can come, but she should go back after seeing Yuru. Don't cause any more trouble. How can there be any trouble? Rongji is a good girl. With Wanru accompanying her, nothing can happen. General, you are too worried. Madame D said with a smile. She turned to Qin Wanru and said with a kind smile, Wanru, tell me, am I right? It's great that Sister Rongji is here. But I'm afraid I can't accompany her. Qin Quanru said awkwardly. I have to accompany Aunt Shui tomorrow. I don't know why Aunt Shui is living alone in the family temple. She looks so pitiful. Madame Qin couldn't stand Qin Wanru's persistent questioning and secretly told her something about Shui Rulan. As for the rest, she only knew after her rebirth. Her words made Qin Huayong feel guilty. The matter of Shui Rulan came back to his mind. His eyes involuntarily moved to the plate of flower-shaped pastries. Madame Qin's face stiffened. She now regretted her decision. She thought that there was nothing between Qin Huayong and Shui Rulan. Now she realized that she had guessed wrong. Thinking that she had personally brought in the vixen who had hidden so well, she was so angry that she beat her chest and stamped her feet. Looking at Qin Huayong's expression, she knew that it was true. No, she could never let Shui Rulan come in. Your Aunt Shui has always liked peace and quiet. In the future, she might even shave her head and become a nun. Don't disturb her and make her unhappy. A month ago, your Aunt Shui asked me which nunnery was good and wanted to find a place with good feng shui to live in. She is also a pitiful woman with no children, but she is very competitive and wants to build a chastity monument for herself. Madame Qin smiled and raised her eyebrows. She didn't believe that Qin Huayong still had the face to make a request after she said so. Hearing that Shui Rulan wanted to be a nun and guard a chastity memorial arch, Qin Huayong felt a pain in his heart. His hands on the table trembled and he felt very sad. Is this what she wants? He thought. Forget it. He had wronged her. Let her have her wish. Mother, you must be mistaken. When Aunt Shui asked me to accompany her to buy cosmetics, she also said that she should dress up beautifully every day. Women dress up for the man who pleases them, so she must dress up beautifully. Qin Wanru said coquettishly, as if she didn't see the gloominess in Madame Qin's eyes at this moment. Shui Rulan had always lived in the mansion and seldom went out. The only male master in this mansion was Qin Huayong. It was easy to know who the so-called women dress up for the man who pleases them was. Qin Huayong almost couldn't hide the joy on his face at this moment. He looked at Qin Wanru with shining eyes, which made Madame Qin gnash her teeth with hatred. Father, I just went to see Aunt Shui. I met Aunt Shui's servant girl, Qianghua, and she told me that a few days ago, Aunt Shui's dishes were very few. It seems that mother also likes to eat the same dishes as Aunt Shui. She said that several dishes that day were only enough for Aunt Shui. Cheonghua ate her own dishes and had a stomachache, so she couldn't keep vigil for Aunt Shui at night. She asked me to go to the kitchen and ask them to wash the dishes more cleanly next time. Qin Wanru said carelessly. Her big eyes blinked twice, looking very delicate and naive. I don't know why Cheonghua told me this. I'm not in charge of the kitchen. Qin Huayong didn't understand at first, and then his face suddenly changed. He suddenly stood up and said, "What did you say?" Cheonghua ate her own dishes and had a stomachache, so she couldn't keep vigil for my cousin. Yes, Cheonghua was still crying there. She said that she made a big trouble and didn't know why Aunt Shui's dishes were very few that day. Wanru said, and then turned to Mrs. Qin with an innocent face. It must be that mother likes the same dishes as Aunt Shui. The dishes that were originally Aunt Shui's happened to share more than half of them with mother. Mother usually takes care of the family, so of course she should eat more. Mrs. Qin's face changed, and she was very anxious. Qin Huayong turned his eyes, almost with a fierce look. Some things couldn't be seen clearly if they were not connected, but if the window paper was poked, it would be easy to see everything clearly. At this time, Qin Huayong was very suspicious. He was also a person who climbed out of a pile of dead people. His eyes fell on Mrs. Qin's face with a bit of hostility. I remember that you always liked to eat spicy dishes. When did you eat so much like my cousin? My cousin likes to eat raw vegetables, but you like to eat seafood. How could you fall to the point of fighting for food with my cousin? Father, what's wrong with you? Qin Wanru looked blank, as if she didn't know that she had aroused Qin Huayong's suspicion. Nothing, you go back first. I have something to say to your mother. Qin Huayong said to Qin Wanru in a soft voice. Then father. I'll leave first. The cakes will be left here. Mother, I'll leave now. Qin Wanru looked confused, but she still obediently said goodbye. Then she bowed to Qin Huayong and Mrs. Qin and left with Qin Yu. Chapter 28. In the study, Qin Huayong's cup smashed at Madame D's feet. Madame D was so scared that she took 2 steps back and hit the tea table beside her. Tell me, what's going on? Qin Huayong looked at Madame D with a gloomy face and a pair of fierce eyes. Madame D was shocked and knew that Qin Huayong was really angry. She hurriedly pretended to be confused and explained, General, I don't know what you're talking about. How come I didn't know that you and my cousin have the same taste? When did you take away my cousin's favorite dishes? Qin Huayong said harshly with a cold voice before the storm. General, I actually wanted to taste my cousin's dishes that day, so I casually mentioned it to the people in the kitchen. After that, the dishes sent by the kitchen, I tasted a few mouthfuls and didn't feel good, so I didn't care about it. I didn't expect that the people in the kitchen actually agreed on the surface but disobeyed in secret and actually took away more than half of my cousin's dishes. Although Madame D was flustered, she knew where the problem was and immediately thought of a countermeasure and said hurriedly. If they wanted to investigate the matter in the kitchen, they could still find out the truth. There were many people who saw Madame D taking away most of the dishes that day, so it was impossible to hide it even if they wanted to. You like my cousin's dishes, so you want to have a taste? Qin Huayong sneered. General, if you don't believe me, you can ask. That day, General and Magistrate Qi happened to go to discuss Yuru's marriage. I didn't know how the discussion went, so I didn't have much appetite. After visiting my mother, I came back for dinner. It was an old maid of my mother who mentioned that my cousin's dishes were delicious, so I had this idea. Do you think that I deliberately want to eat my cousin's dishes? Madame D felt wronged and her eyes turned red. At that time, she deliberately asked an old maid of old grandma to mention this matter casually, and when she mentioned it, she deliberately mentioned it beside old grandma's confidant nanny Duan. Because Qin Huayong had a good relationship with Magistrate Qi, every time they drank together, they were very congenial. Almost every time they came back drunk, and on that day, Madame D deliberately asked Qin Huayong to go to discuss the marriage with Magistrate Qi. How could there be such a coincidence? You happened to take away my cousin's dishes, so Cheonghua used her own portion and got a stomachache. Qin Huayong found it hard to believe Mrs. Qin's explanation, but his voice softened. General, how could I know such a thing? You know, my cousin has never been close to me. She didn't tell me anything. Although I tried my best to make friends with her, she always treated me coldly. I really don't know what she was thinking. Cheonghua is her maid. What does she mean? Madame D cried aggrievedly and covered her face with a handkerchief. Her words were not pleasant to hear. It meant that there was something wrong with Cheonghua's words. Qin Huayong's face was still gloomy. He knew that Shui Rulan and Madame D didn't get along well, and they were always indifferent when they met each other. What Madame D said was true, but he still couldn't get rid of the annoyance in his heart, and his eyebrows were tightly knotted. Of course, he didn't know that what he saw was what Madame D wanted him to see on purpose. His so-called knowledge was only one-sided. He thought that Madame D treated Shui Rulan sincerely, but in fact, Madame D had always been indifferent to Shui Rulan and even mocked her to attack her in a way that he couldn't see. No matter whether you did it on purpose or not, at least it was because of you that such a mistake happened. Since the mistake has been made, and it's our fault, we naturally can't treat my cousin badly, Qin Huayong said slowly after a moment of silence this time. General. Madame D was shocked. She stopped crying, raised her head in astonishment, and shouted in astonishment. What? Shouldn't it be like this? Things have happened, and we have to bear the responsibility, Qin Huayong sat down and said decisively. Qin Huayong sat down and said decisively. Originally, he did not know Shui Rulan's thoughts. Seeing that she was about to enter the family temple, he did not dare to say anything. Since his cousin did have feelings for him, of course, he could not let her down. But this is a misunderstanding, and my cousin also blamed herself for entering the family temple, which means. Hearing that Qin Huayong really meant it, Madame D became anxious. She pretended to cry, and didn't even have time to wipe off her tears. She hurriedly stopped him and said, General, if you want to make it up to her, just let her do it. If you embarrass her, it will be more difficult to deal with then. Her words were extremely beautiful. She completely considered from Shui Rulan's point of view, and her words were even more reasonable. If it were before, Qin Huayong would definitely be moved by her words. This was also the reason why Qin Huayong had not dared to take action for so many days. However, Qin Wanru's words just now dispelled his concerns. Since I have wronged her first, as a man, I have to make it up to her. I will go to discuss this with my mother later. Qin Huayong shook his hand, and after a long silence, he resolutely said. But what about me? Madame D didn't expect that things would suddenly change, and immediately said with grievance, I can't change for a moment, and I still want to treat her as my cousin. I feel terrible. Saying this, Madame D's tears fell down. This time, she was not pretending, and most of her tears came out because of anxiety. If there was really nothing between Shui Rulan and Qin Huayong, Madame D wouldn't care so much. But if there was a lot of affection between them, then there would be a big problem. That day you suddenly took away a large part of my cousin's dishes, and then Cheonghua ate the dishes and had diarrhea. It can't be such a coincidence. Qin Huayong said coldly. Since there was suspicion in his heart, he would lead it in that direction, and the more he thought about it, the more suspicious he felt. These things were really too coincidental. Although Qin Huayong didn't know the truth of the inner court, and he couldn't see through Madame D, who was good at playing tricks in the backyard, it didn't mean that he couldn't see through the strange situation inside. At this time, seeing that Madame D refused to agree for a long time, he also felt a little annoyed. But this thing is really just a coincidence. If you don't believe it, you can go to the kitchen to ask, or you can ask the people around my mother. Madame D covered her face and cried again, looking extremely pitiful. You can leave now, it's settled. Qin Huayong waved his hand and said unhappily, and then added, don't make those coincidences again, there are not so many coincidences in this world. If you don't have the heart to manage Yuru's affairs, let others help you manage this family's affairs. This sentence was almost a warning to Madame D. Hearing this, Madame D was furious and wanted to say something back. When she was about to open her mouth, her sleeve was silently pulled a few times. She turned around and saw that it was her personal old maid, Nanny Zhou. Nanny Zhou made a gesture to her, pointed to the door, and signaled her to go out at this time. Looking at Qin Huayong's face, Madame D also knew that it was useless for her to say anything at this time. She could only secretly bite her teeth, bowed to Qin Huayong in grievance, and left while wiping her tears. Seeing Madame D leave, Qin Huayong raised his eyes again, reached out to rub between his eyebrows, and looked at the plate of snacks on the table, and didn't say anything for a long time. Coming out from Qin Huayong's study, Madame D walked to a secluded corner with Nanny Zhou, stopped, and spat fiercely, with a face full of jealousy and hatred. That bitch has an affair with the general. If I had known it earlier, I wouldn't have given them such a chance. Madam, don't worry, it hasn't been settled yet, has it? Nanny Zhou comforted her. It seems that the general wants it to be settled immediately. She hasn't married into the family yet, but he has already helped her to this extent. If she married into the family, there will be no way for us to live. Madame D gritted her teeth and said hatefully, and the handkerchief in her hand was almost crushed by her. How could she be reconciled to her small scheme and make such a big opponent for herself? She had thought that with Shui Rulan's temperament, she would be ashamed to death after such a thing happened, and she would be too ashamed to see others and hide herself. Madam, don't worry, even if the general has the intention, it can't be settled in a short time. First Mrs. Marriage was ruined a few days ago, and now everyone is talking about the quarrel between our mansion and Magistrate Qi. At this time, the general and old grandma will definitely not let the general marry cousin Miss. Nanny Zhou's eyes lit up. Jing Guang pointed to the direction of the family temple and reminded Madame D. At this time, they were in the teeth of the storm. If it was said that Qin Huayong took his cousin as a concubine, it would not be good to say, and it would even affect Qin Huayong's career. This reminded Madame D, and she nodded with a gloomy face. If the news that he took his own cousin as a concubine was spread out, it would indeed be very bad. Qin Huayong had always cherished his reputation, and now he was working in the capital city, so he couldn't be careless when he wanted to be transferred back to the capital city. But he will let her marry into the family eventually. Madame D thought about it and still felt reluctant. Madam, it is not up to the general to decide whether to marry into the family or not. If something happens to cousin Miss these days, even if the general has the intention, it can't be done. Nanny Zhou reminded her, isn't first Miss Qi going to marry into the family for fun? Let her stay for a few more days, until Magistrate Qi comes to pick her up, no matter it is Magistrate Qi or the first young master of the Qi family, then we can make plans. No, it will make the general suspicious. Madame D refused decisively, because Qin Huayong had warned her just now. Madam, don't worry, even if it is a coincidence, it is not your coincidence. At that time, the general can't blame it on you, and he can't go to the Qi family to make trouble. Our mansion is guilty of what happened to First Miss. Nanny Zhou pointed to the direction of the family temple. Her words made Madame D silent for a while. After thinking for a while, her eyes showed some ruthlessness. Okay. At that time, if something happens to that girl, won't the Qi family come to solve it? At that time, let that girl and that bitch get into trouble together. Chapter 29. Qin Wanru was running with all her strength, but it seemed that she couldn't find the way. She was lost. There was a bottomless darkness in front of her, and someone was chasing her from behind. She could hear the heavy breathing. It seemed that there was a knife behind her, but she couldn't see the direction and didn't know where to go. Someone was calling her. It seemed to be far away when she first heard it, but it seemed to be near her ears when she heard it again. She wanted to run there, and it seemed that the voice was guiding her. But before she could run there, she heard someone scream. She turned back subconsciously, and the whole scene was covered with blood. Ah! She screamed and sat up. Miss, what's wrong with you? Did you have a nightmare again? Qin Yu rushed over and lifted the gauze curtain. She saw Qin Wanru's pale face covered with sweat. Her face was as white as snow, but her lips were bright red. Her black hair was wet with sweat on her cheeks. Even though she was young, she looked extremely charming at this moment. Every time she fell asleep, Qin Wanru would have a nightmare. She was awakened by the nightmare just now during her nap. I want to drink water. Qin Wanru's voice was a little hoarse. She reached out to touch her forehead and whispered. She frowned slightly. Was that dream real? She felt that it seemed to be real. She forgot something when she was reborn, but it kept repeating in the dream. Miss, here is some warm water. Qin Yu turned back to take the water from the table, wiped her hands, and handed it to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru drank 2 mouthfuls and slowly woke up from the nightmare. Is Lu Rongji here? It was afternoon. Since Madame D had told her father, she wouldn't let her wait for too long. She just arrived not long ago. At this time, she said that she was persuading First Miss in her yard. She said that first young master of the Qi family had forgiven First Miss and asked someone to bring a gift. Qin Yu said. When First Miss Qi came over, she made a lot of noise, and all the servants in the mansion were shocked. Now they all said that first young master of the Qi family was a broad-minded person. Freshen me up. Qin Wanru pulled herself together, lifted the quilt, and moved her legs to get off the bed. Qin Yu went out and asked someone to prepare the bath water. Looking at Mrs. Sweaty Face, a simple wash was certainly not enough. Qin Wanru is washed. After taking a bath, Qin Yue sat in front of the dressing table. Qin Yue helped her dry her hair and said, Miss, when you were taking a bath just now, Madam sent someone over to ask if you had woken up. She asked you to accompany Miss Qi after you woke up. Did he say that I was taking a bath? Qin Wanru asked, looking at herself in the mirror. Yes, but Madam still urged you to hurry up. Qin Yu said indignantly, every time Miss Qi comes here, nothing good happens. Last time, she almost fell from the attic. She always thinks of ways to harm Mississippi. She has beaten Miss several times, but Madam and Miss Qi don't care. Qin Wanru was silent for a moment, and a trace of hostility flashed in her eyes. In her previous life, she had been so stupid to believe Qin Yuru and Madame D's words and think that Qi Rongji did not do it on purpose. She remembered that once, Qi Rongji had caused her to fall into the lotus pond, causing her to suffer from the cold air entering her body. This had also caused her to be despised during the marriage proposal. Of course, it was Madame D who had deliberately spread the rumor that she had a problem with having children because of the cold air entering her body. Madame D knew that Qi Rongji did not like her and even did not get along with her, but she deliberately invited Miss Qi back. Her purpose was self-evident. No matter what happened between Qin Wanru and Qi Rongji, the mansion would definitely ask her to give in to her. After all, the general's mansion owed Qi's mansion something. Qin Wanru slightly squinted her eyes and watched Qin Yu cleverly dry her hair, then coiled it into 2 buns and inserted a simple hairpin. Let's go see Grandma. Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes and already had an idea. In her previous life, Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji had always worked together to deal with her. In this life, she wanted to prevent them from getting together from now on. She loved watching dog-eat-dog drama. Qi Rongji was not a reasonable person. When she was rude and vicious, she would not even care about her own family. Moreover, she had another characteristic. When she was angry and embarrassed, she would hit whoever she saw, regardless of whether they were close or not. She was like a mad dog. Don't accompany Miss Qi. Qin Yu was stunned and did not understand. Accompany what? Isn't she accompanying Big Sister? Qin Wanru shook her head and stood up from the stool. She stood up and walked out. When she walked outside, she saw Nanny Yu coming in and could not help but stop. "Miss." Nanny Yu saw Qin Wanru and excitedly walked 2 steps forward to greet Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru stretched out her hand and gently said, "Nanny Yu, you don't have to be so polite. How are you?" Yes, I'm fine now." Nanny Yu nodded repeatedly. She had not fully recovered, but when she thought that Qin Wanru did not have anyone she could use, she quickly got up and rushed over. "Since you're almost recovered, Nanny Yu can come back to me. From now on, Nanny Yu will be in charge of the matters in the courtyard. I've already spoken to Grandma." Qin Wanru's eyes were filled with tears. She knew that Nanny Yu must be worried about her, which was why she rushed over regardless of her own health. In her previous life, Nanny Yu was also worried about her. After Nanny Fang was beaten to death, Qin Wanru had already told old grandma that the nanny in charge of her courtyard would be Nanny Yu from now on. "Rest assured, Mississippi. I will definitely help you manage the courtyard." Nanny Yu was moved when she knew that her little master valued her again. "You can take a rest in the room on the side first. If there's anything, just ask someone to do it. If Madam comes to ask me later, just tell her that I have something to discuss with old grandma." Qin Wanru wanted to leave, but after thinking about it, she stopped and gave the order. "Rest assured, Mississippi. I understand." Nanny Yu nodded in response. Qin Wanru left with Qin Yu. After pausing at the gate of the courtyard, she did not go to old grandma's courtyard. Instead, she walked in another direction, which was the direction of the mansion's garden. Not long after she left, an old maid rushed into the courtyard, and someone brought her to Nanny Yu. "Second Miss hasn't gotten up yet. Miss Chi has been here for so long." Madam told Second Miss to hurry up. "It's not good to keep the guests waiting," the old maid said unhappily. She had come here for the second time, so of course, she could not be happy. Second Miss has gotten up, but now she has gone to old grandma's place. Nanny Yu looked at the old maid and replied calmly according to Qin Wanru's instructions. "What do you mean? Didn't I tell Second Miss to accompany Miss Chi just now? Why is she going to old grandma at this time?" The old maid glared and said unhappily. "That's what Second Miss said." "I don't know either." Nanny Yu spread out her hands, and then turned her head and coughed twice in a low voice. "Then I'll go back to Madam first. When I see Second Miss, tell her to stop dawdling." Seeing that she could not get anything out of her, the old maid had no choice but to say helplessly. After saying that, she came out of Nanny Yu's room and angrily walked out of the door. But when she reached the gate of the courtyard, she stopped. After a while, a little servant girl came out of the door and looked around to make sure no one was around. Then she whispered to the old maid, "Second Miss didn't go to old grandma's place. I saw her go to the garden." The little servant girl pointed to the road and said. This road was definitely not the way to old grandma's yard. The old maid was so angry that she almost laughed. It was obvious that Second Miss did not like Miss Chi and deliberately avoided her. She snorted coldly and turned to report to Madame D. Hearing that Qin Wanru actually avoided it, Madame D sneered and immediately ordered someone to report the news to Qin Yuru. Of course, it was not reported to Qin Yuru. The most important thing was to report it to Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji's temperament was not easy to deal with. In the past, when she did not like Qin Wanru, she had made Qin Wanru suffer a lot. Even when she had nothing to do, she would find trouble, let alone now. Sure enough, when Qin Yuru heard that Qin Wanru dared to avoid her, Qi Rongji immediately got angry. She snorted coldly and stood up to find trouble with Qin Wanru, but her hand was grabbed by Qin Yuru. "Sister Qi, where are you going?" "I'm going to find Qin Wanru and see if she has the cheek to say that she went to see old grandma." Qi Rongji had always been very arrogant. At this time, she felt that Qin Wanru made her lose face, so she said coldly. "What if she is really at grandma's place when you go to find her?" Qin Yuru reminded her. "How is it possible? didn't your mother's servant say that she obviously took another road? That road to Madame Dowager's yard has to take a big detour. Is Qin Wanru out of her mind? If she wants to find Madame Dowager, she has to go in the opposite direction first. Qi Rongji sneered again and again. When she saw Qin Wanru later, she would definitely teach her a lesson. Qin Yuru was certainly happy to see a good show, but she still pretended to care about Qi Rongji and held her hand. She said, "Yes, my second sister must have gone to see the lotus pond. You should be careful. Second sister has become much more vicious now. I don't know who instigated her. I'm afraid that you will be at a disadvantage if you go there." "I'll be at a disadvantage?" Qin Wanru also has the ability to do so. Who instigated her? Of course it's that delicate and weak Miss Shui in your mansion. I've long known that she is not a good person. Qi Rongji snorted coldly. Before she came, her brother had told her clearly that Qin Yuru was framed by Shui Rulan. Then you should be careful. Qin Yuru reached out and patted Qi Rongji's hand. She repeatedly exhorted Qi Rongji, looking as if she was really worried about her. Grandma likes second sister the most. If you argue with her, Grandma will definitely be angry. If you really go to the lotus pond, don't go there. A maid accidentally fell into it a few days ago and almost died. It doesn't look deep, but it's actually very deep. I know. When I was young, Qin Wanru fell into it herself once and framed me again. Qi Rongji said discontentedly. She pushed Qin Yuru's hand away and turned to walk out with her servant girl in an aggressive manner. So what if old grandma could protect Qin Wanru? A few years ago, she had found an excuse to push Qin Wanru into the water. So what if she pushed Qin Wanru again? If Qin Yuru did not mention it, she would have forgotten about it. Now that Qin Yuru mentioned it, she suddenly remembered that it was really a good place. At that time, if Qin Wanru's wet nurse, who was good at swimming, had not kept an eye on Qin Wanru and jumped into the water to save Qin Wanru after she pushed Qin Wanru into the water, Qin Wanru would not have survived. Qi Rongji felt angry when she saw Qin Wanru's face. In the past, when she went out, people would praise her. Since Qin Wanru appeared in front of people, people would only praise her. Chapter 30. Qin Wanru did go to the garden, and she went to the lotus pond. The lotus pond in the general's mansion was a good view in the mansion. As long as it was not winter, people would go to the lotus pond when they came to the general's mansion. Although the pond was not 10 miles long, it was not small. It was autumn now, and the autumn leaves were a little withered, but some lotus leaves could still be seen. A few lotus flowers fell on the green lotus leaves, and the withered lotus had its own flavor. Qin Wanru went to the waterside pavilion in the middle of the lotus pond. The waterside pavilion was zigzagging on the lotus pond. There were a few rooms in the innermost part, and there was a small octagonal pavilion against the outermost part of the room. You could enjoy the scenery of the lotus pond in the pavilion, or you could invite 3 to 5 friends to the lotus pond to drink tea and chat. There was also a place to rest in the house. The leftmost room even had a collection of books. If you were not in the pavilion, you could just open the windows of the house to enjoy the scenery while reading. Qin Wanru's destination was the octagonal pavilion. Sitting in the pavilion, you could see the shore far away, and you could also see the people in the pavilion from the shore. But because it was a little far away, you could not see clearly. Qin Wanru walked to the waterside pavilion and got on it. After a few steps, she stopped and stepped on it a little harder. There was a board under her feet which had been loose for a long time. The servant girl who fell into the water a few days ago fell from here, so she accidentally stepped on it a little looser. At that time, she happened to pass by and saw the servant girl fell into the water. She immediately asked Qin Yu to call people to save the servant girl. After that, everyone went to pay attention to the servant girl who fell into the water, and only Qin Wanru came to have a look, and found that a board here was loose. She originally wanted to tell Madame D when she went back, but she did not expect that she would be reborn and delayed it. She stepped on it, and it was indeed loose. Standing behind the board, holding Qing Yu's hand, Qin Wanru stepped a few more times. The board was not only loose, but also she just needed to put her foot on it gently, and one end would go down, and the other end would go up. Qin Wanru was very satisfied with the position under her feet. She stood still and carefully walked to the waterside pavilion, and Qing Yu carefully followed her. They went to the pavilion one after another. After looking out, she asked Qing Yu to open the window of the room next to the pavilion. "Miss, are you going to read here? Isn't the wind too strong?" Qing Yu said as she opened the window. The wind in the lake was really strong. It was a bit cold as it blew over. "No, I just want to have a look. Let's go." After arranging everything, Qin Wanru smiled and turned to go out. Qing Yu couldn't figure out what Qin Wanru was thinking at the moment, but she still followed obediently. The two of them returned to the waterside pavilion one after the other. They stopped in front of the loose wooden boards for a moment before quietly walking back. After getting on the shore, Qin Wanru casually walked back. After a few steps, she suddenly met an old maid. Seeing Qin Wanru coming with Qing Yu, she stopped and walked to salute. "Second miss, where are you going?" "Madam was looking for you just now." "I have something to do at the waterside pavilion." "You go to report to my mother." "I'll be there in a minute," Qin Wanru said with a smile. "Yes, this servant will report to Madam immediately." The old maid was here to find out where Qin Wanru had gone. She immediately agreed and turned back to report to Madam D. On the way, she met Qi Rongji, who was up to no good. Qi Rongji couldn't find Qin Wanru. Seeing an old maid coming from the opposite side, she waved her hand and called her over. "Have you seen your second miss?" "Yes," second miss said she had something to do at the waterside pavilion. "It's not far from here." The old maid recognized Qi Rongji and immediately gestured with her hands. "She has gone there." Qi Rongji was overjoyed. She was thinking about how to lead Qin Wanru there. Unexpectedly, Qin Wanru went there by herself. That was really great. At that time, she could create an accident and push Qin Wanru into the water. Even if there was something wrong, General's Mansion would not say anything for rudeness first because General's Mansion had rejected the engagement of her eldest brother. Feeling proud, she couldn't help but speed up and rush to the waterside pavilion by the lotus pond. She was afraid that if she was late, Qin Wanru would leave. When she arrived at the edge of the lotus pond, she turned a corner and saw that the window of the innermost room of the waterside pavilion was wide open. Needless to say, Qin Wanru must be there at this time. She didn't stop and hurried to the waterside pavilion. At this time, there was no one by the lotus pond, but she wanted to see who could save her. Qi Rongji rushed forward with bad intentions, even faster than her servant girl. When she stepped on the waterside pavilion, she walked even faster. Unexpectedly, her feet loosened and she immediately lost her balance. She wanted to grab something at hand to stabilize her body, but it was too late. With a plop sound, Qi Rongji stepped on a board and her body fell into the river. Her body fluttered in the lake in panic. "Someone come quickly, save our miss, come quickly." The servant girl behind her was startled. Seeing her fall into the lake, she shouted for help. Two old maids happened to hear someone calling for help and hurried over. One of the two old maids could swim, so she immediately jumped into the lake and swam over to save her. Fortunately, the board was close to the river bank, so the old maids swam over in time and Qi Rongji was saved. But even so, Qi Rongji fainted on the ground when she was rescued. Other people also heard the cry for help and came over to see that it was the first miss of Magistrate Qi's mansion. Someone immediately ran to report to Madame D and Qin Yuru. Hearing that Qi Rongji fell into the lake, Madame D was shocked and hurried over with her people. On the way, she met Qin Yuru who was hurrying over and they rushed to the lake together. When they arrived at the lake, Qi Rongji had already woken up. "Sister Qi, what happened to you? Are you okay? How could you be so careless?" Seeing Chi Rongji who was wet, Qin Yuru hurriedly squatted down and said anxiously. Pa! A heavy slap in the face made Qin Yuru unable to squat down and immediately sat on the ground. She covered her face and looked at Chi Rongji in shock. You want to hurt me, right? Is it not enough for you to hurt my brother? You bitch, I will beat you to death. Chi Rongji was ashamed and angry. She would bite whoever she could get her hands on. She gritted her teeth and cursed. She wanted to hit Qin Yuru again, but this time she was stopped by the people beside Qin Yuru. Madame D came over and pulled Qin Yuru up. Seeing her red and swollen face, she was so angry that her face became gloomy. She stood in front of Chi Rongji and said sternly, First Miss Chi, what do you mean? Why did you hit Yuru? You should ask your baby daughter. She asked me to come to the waterside pavilion and told me that it was a good place. She just hinted me to come here. I thought she really wanted to reconcile with my brother, but it turns out that she has such an intention to hurt me. Chi Rongji was not a person who would suffer losses. She fell into the water for no reason and ended up in such a mess. She vented her anger directly on Qin Yuru. She had always been arrogant. In the past, even Qi Tianyu would give in to her. Qin Yuru even obeyed her for the sake of Qi Tianyu, which made Chi Rongji very happy. First Miss Qi, do you have any evidence? Madame D frowned and said coldly. Seeing her daughter being hit, she was also angry. Why not? She was the one who led me to Qin Wanru. If it wasn't for her, I would not be here. Chi Rongji said arrogantly. Anyway, she could not do anything if something happened to her today. Thinking that she almost drowned, she felt that the whole general's mansion wanted to hurt her. Wanru is here. Wanru led you here. Madame D softened her tone and pointed to the open window of the waterside pavilion. She said, since it was Wanru who led you here, you should look for her. Yuru doesn't know anything, how could she hurt you? She wanted to shift the blame to Qin Wanru insidiously. I led Miss Qi here. I haven't even seen Miss Qi. How could mother say that I led Miss Qi here? Qin Wanru's voice suddenly came from outside the crowd. Everyone turned around and saw Qin Wanru walking slowly with Qin Yu outside the crowd. What happened here? Did Miss Qi fall into the water? Qin Wanru came over and saw Chi Rongji's wet appearance. She immediately understood. Qin Wanru, did you lead me here on purpose, you bitch? Seeing Qin Wanru coming over, Chi Rongji raised her eyebrows. She supported her servant girl and wanted to rush over to hit Qin Wanru. Compared to Qin Yuru hitting Qin Wanru, Chi Rongji had done it many times, so it was easy for her to do so. Anyway, she had hit Qin Wanru in the past. Madame D and Qin Yuru would not say anything. At most, it was a child who was not sensible and accidentally bumped into each other when they were playing. Qin Wanru was already prepared. She took a few steps back and smiled coldly. First Miss Qi, what you said is ridiculous. I haven't seen you, how could I lead you here? Don't you know how you came here? Don't you know who it is, First Miss Qi? A maid fell into the water a few days ago. Didn't the person who led you here tell you to be careful? Her words reminded Chi Rongji. She rolled her eyes and immediately saw an old maid beside Madame D. She pointed at her and immediately shouted, it was she who led me here. She said Qin Wanru was in the waterside pavilion. Who is she? No one thought that Chi Rongji really found someone. Even Madame D subconsciously looked at the old maid. Seeing everyone looking at her, the old maid panicked. She waved her hands and said hurriedly, Miss Qi, you asked me just now. I didn't know anything. I just answered you when you asked. I didn't mean to lead you there. She is mother's person. Did mother ask you to go to the waterside pavilion? Qin Wanru's eyes also fell on the old maid. Before Madame D spoke, she said softly. It is you who want to hurt me. Qin Yuru told me that I could find Qin Wanru here. Madame D asked the old maid to show me the way. Good, good. I have long said that you and your daughter are not kind. You treated my brother like that and now you treat me like that. I will go back now and let my father and brother reason with you. You are so vicious. Hearing that the old maid was really Madame D's person, Qi Rongji couldn't help but connect all the things in her mind. She felt that this was a trap for her. She was so angry that her voice trembled. She pointed at Qin Yuru and Madame D and said. She hit Qin Yuru just now because she was angry and ashamed. Speaking of it, she still felt a little guilty. But now, she was very self-righteous and scolded her loudly. Chapter 31. Madame Dowager stood outside the crowd with Nanny Duan. She frowned and looked at the crowd unhappily. Then she walked over slowly and asked, "What happened?" "Old grandma, everyone in your mansion bullied me." Qi Rongji burst into tears when she saw old grandma. She was not afraid of Madame D, but she was afraid of old grandma. Fell into the lake. Come on, take Miss Qi to change her clothes. What's the point of crying here? Old grandma had always disliked Qi Rongji. Seeing her crying, she said coldly. Under such circumstances, he should change his clothes first before reasoning with her. Nanny Duan hurriedly asked someone to help Qi Rongji to change her clothes. Qi Rongji felt cold all over and knew it was not good for her to stay here any longer. She stood up obediently and was taken away while wiping her tears. All of you, come with me. Old grandma's eyes fell on Madame D's face coldly. After that, she turned around and walked to the pavilion on the side. Madame D hurriedly followed. Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru also followed her into the pavilion. Nanny Duan asked the other people who were not involved to leave. What on earth is going on? Old grandma sat on the stone bench and asked slowly as her cold eyes fell on Madame D's face. Mother, I don't know what's going on either. Miss Qi fell into the lake on our way here. She said it was because of Wanru, Mrs. Qin said with a blank look on her face, but the meaning of her words was leading to Qin Wanru. What does this have to do with Zhuozhuo? I heard that she was the last one to arrive. I also heard that Yuru was slapped by Miss Qi and couldn't speak. What's going on? Old grandma stared at Madame D and said. I really don't know. I came a little late. Madame D was a little flustered. She did not expect old grandma to know what happened before she arrived. It was a little far-fetched to put the blame on Qin Wanru at this time. Madame D secretly gritted her teeth. Originally, she wanted to use Qi Rongji to deal with Qin Wanru. She did not expect Qi Rongji to act like a mad dog and bite her and Yuru. Grandma, I don't know why Miss Qi hit me. She went to look for second sister. Qin Yuru saw that Madame D could not say anything under the interrogation and felt wronged. You don't know? Aren't you in charge of this backyard? It's been a while since it happened, but you still don't know? Is this how you usually manage things? Old grandma ignored Qin Yuru's crying and continued to stare at Mrs. Qin. Mother, Madame D was a little flustered by the interrogation. She rolled her eyes and said, I came a little late, but I know the general situation. I just haven't verified it, so I don't dare to say anything. Why did Miss Qi come here? Old grandma ignored her excuse and asked slowly with narrowed eyes. He said he came to play with Wanru. Madame D had told her the general situation just now, so she answered quickly. She didn't go to Wanru's yard. Why is she here? Madame Dowager continued to ask. She heard that Wanru came to the garden, so she chased after her. Mrs. Qin sorted out her words and answered carefully. Qin Wanru squinted and hid the coldness in her eyes. She stood aside quietly and listened to Mrs. Qin's answer. Like herself, Grandma had never liked Qi Rongji. She is an outsider and only brought a servant girl here. How did she know that Zhuozhuo came to the garden and happened to be in this place? Old Grandma asked with a very bad look. Her question made Mrs. Qin speechless. Of course, she and Qin Yuru had deliberately asked Qi Rongji to come here to look for Qin Wanru. But she did not dare to say so in front of old grandma. I heard that first Miss Qi was accompanying big sister before. I don't know why she suddenly came to find me and even chased me to the garden. On the way, the old maid beside my mother also pointed the way for Miss Qi. Qin Wanru raised her clear eyes and pointed at an old maid who was hiding behind Madame D at this time with a cold look. Hearing her words, Mrs. Qin and Qin Yuru's faces changed. This was what Qi Rongji had said just now, so they did not dare to refute her. Second sister, after talking with me for a while, Miss Qi said that she wanted to play with you. I thought that she and you used to play together, so I told her that you seemed to have gone to the garden. Qin Yuru's face became more and more aggrieved, and she could not hide the eagerness in her heart. Old grandma was too calm. She panicked. Old grandma, I saw second miss on the way. Miss Qi happened to ask, so I pointed her in the direction. I didn't mean anything bad. It was just a coincidence on the way. The old maid got the hint from Mrs. Qin and hurriedly explained. Big sister, when did you see me playing well with Miss Qi? Do you mean after she slapped me because of a flower, or when she pushed me because of a box of cosmetic powder? Is the so-called good time referring to the fight between Miss Qi and me? Qin Wanru asked without changing her expression. Her words made Qin Yuru speechless for a while, and she looked at Mrs. Qin in panic. Qi Rongji and Qin Wanru seemed to be born enemies. Whenever they were together, they would always quarrel. Of course, Qin Yuru had been secretly stirring up trouble. Wanru, no matter how bad Miss Qi is, she is still a guest. How can you say that? Mrs. Qin's face darkened, and she reprimanded. Mother, you mean that every time Miss Qi makes an excuse to hit me, I have to take the initiative to be hit, and then I have to say that Miss Qi did a good job, and come back to hit me next time? Qin Wanru's eyes were extremely cold. Mother, I really can't believe that you are my biological mother. You let an outsider hit me again and again, and you want me to smile at her. Am I really your biological mother? Her words made Mrs. Qin speechless. What's more, old grandma was sitting here. The so-called biological mother was just a lie from Qin Wanru. Old grandma snorted at the side, but did not say anything. Second sister, how can you talk to mother like that? Mother is doing that for the sake of our mansion. She has no choice but to give in to Magistrate Qi. Do you think she is willing to do that? Seeing that Madame D was speechless, Qin Yuru quickly defended Madame D. Since they are both biological daughters, why don't you let big sister be hit to please Magistrate Qi? Qin Wanru said slowly. Her words made Mrs. Qin's face turn red. If she was really Qin Wanru's biological mother, she would be biased at most. But she was not, so she was vicious. She would torture her daughter to death even though she was not her biological daughter. Qin Wanru repeatedly brought up this matter to let Mrs. Qin clearly tell others that she was not her biological mother. Without the title of biological mother, no matter what Mrs. Qin did in the future, she could not be unfair to Qin Wanru. Mother asked you to give in to Miss Qi because of your father. Mrs. Qin explained hurriedly. Mother, I don't know why I want to give in to Miss Qi. Father and Magistrate Qi are of the same rank, not superior and subordinate, so there is no need to give in to anything. Even if big sister and first young Master Qi broke off the engagement, Magistrate Qi did not say anything. Moreover, the small quarrels between Miss Qi and me in the past would not affect father. Qin Wanru coldly exposed Mrs. Qin's panic. Her voice was very cold, revealing a chill. It was very different from her current sweet and adorable appearance. Her words were clean and pointed to the heart of the matter. Her words forced Mrs. Qin and Qin Yuru to be overwhelmed. If Magistrate Qi could tolerate something like being humiliated by Qin Yuru and breaking off the engagement, what else could he not tolerate? This meant that the general's mansion did not need to move to Magistrate Qi's mansion, and he did not need to use his daughter to please Miss Qi. What do you mean by this? Are you reprimanding me? How can you be so rebellious? Qin Yuru raised her head suddenly and looked at Qin Wanru angrily. Qin Wanru was still looking at Mrs. Qin, as if she did not see Qin Yuru's angry and bluffing face, and ignored Qin Yuru's words. The whole scene became strangely quiet. Everyone was quietly waiting for old grandma's decision. Mrs. Qin, how do you explain? After a long while, Madame Dowager raised her head, looked at Qin Wanru thoughtfully, and sighed softly. Hearing Madame Dowager's sigh, Qin Wanru's heart was slowly relieved. Grandma had agreed. Mother, I have nothing to explain, it is all because of General. Hearing old grandma's words, Mrs. Qin really panicked. Although Wanru is not your biological daughter, what did you say at that time? You said that you would definitely treat Wanru as your biological daughter, but look at you, what have you done? Old grandma said slowly, and her eyes fell on Mrs. Qin's face, full of blame. Mother, The truth was revealed in front of Qin Wanru, and Mrs. Qin panicked, and her face changed dramatically. In the past, she had always used the fact that she was Qin Wanru's biological mother and would not harm her. Now that the truth was revealed, not only did it mean that she could not use this as an excuse in the future, but it also meant that what she said in the past was false, to deceive Qin Wanru. Mrs. Qin did not expect that the truth would be revealed mercilessly by old grandma in front of so many people, and she was flustered and confused. Mother, you are indeed not my biological mother, but big sister's biological mother. Qin Wanru did not look surprised, and looked at Mrs. Qin calmly, and said word by word. It was as if she had expected this. Why was it expected? Because she had guessed it long ago, or based on Mrs. Qin's usual behavior. There was no surprise, no sadness, and it was as if she was talking about someone else's business, but there was a trace of sadness at the corner of her eyes, which reminded everyone that she was just a child who did not have the love of her biological mother, and was framed by Mrs. Qin out of jealousy. Zhuozhua, come here, you still have grandma. Old grandma waved to her, feeling sorry for her. Qin Wanru bit her lip and walked over. Old grandma reached out to hug her, and gently patted her on the back, and comforted her softly. Zhuozhua, be good, even if you do not have the love of your biological mother, you are still grandma's granddaughter. Chapter 32. In her previous life, Madame D had always regarded herself as Qin Wanru's biological mother. Therefore, she had always been reasonable. Qin Wanru's biological mother would not harm her own child. At most, she was just a little biased. Therefore, Madame D's plots against Qin Wanru were all explained by this reason. In the end, Qin Wanru found out that she was not Madame D's biological daughter. It was just Madame D who used this as a pretext to plot against her. In this life, after her rebirth, the first step was to peel off Madame D's mask of hypocrisy, so that Madame D would not have the face to say that she was her biological mother. Madame D, are you really not willing to treat Wanru as your biological daughter? Old grandma held Qin Wanru's slim body in her arms and looked at Madame D fiercely. She was really disappointed with Madame D. Mother, I'm not. I really want to treat Wanru as my biological daughter. But about Miss Qi. I can't do anything about it. In the past, although we had disputes, I thought it was just a child's matter and it was not a big deal. I didn't expect Wanru to think of me like this. Mother, I really didn't expect it to be like this. Madame D cried pitifully and explained while wiping her tears with a handkerchief. It was just a child's matter. Qin Wanru gradually stopped talking in old grandma's arms. A trace of hatred flashed in her eyes. In her previous life, she had been misled by such reasons and was bullied by the vicious Qi Rongji for various reasons. You don't have to care about this child's matter in the future. I'll take care of it myself. Old grandma said coldly. Mother, you're getting old. How can you take care of children's matters? If people know that you're still taking care of this kind of matter at such an old age, how can I feel good about it? I won't be able to show my face when I go out. Madame D said hurriedly. She was not willing to let old grandma take over Qin Wanru's matter. Now that you don't care about other people's children, you can go out and show off. Old grandma was unmoved. Her words made Madame D's face turn red. In the past, she had always shown Qin Wanru a loving mother in front of others. Go back and deal with Miss Chi's matter. Do what you should do. Although the general's mansion is not talented, you don't have to be humble to the daughter of the magistrate and even sacrifice the safety of your own daughter. Madame Dowager said coldly. She stood up and pulled Qin Wanru out. Qin Wanru hurriedly reached out to help Madame Dowager. Mother, Madame D said hurriedly. She wanted to reach out to help old grandma, but Nanny Duan took 2 steps forward and held old grandma's other side, squeezing her to the other side. Madame D's hand fell awkwardly on the sachet on her waist. It was a very unique sachet, but it was a little familiar. Madame D would wear it at this time in the past. Qin Wanru glanced at the sachet casually and didn't care about it. You'd better stay out of Wanru's matter. Return all her things to me and leave them here. You don't have to interfere with her affairs and her marriage. Old grandma stopped and glanced at Madame D coldly. She was really disappointed with this daughter-in-law. After that, she turned around and walked out with Qin Wanru without looking at Madame D and her daughter. Grandma. Qin Yuru stamped her feet and wanted to chase after them. But Madame D held her back and they watched the grandmother and granddaughter leave. Mother, why did you stop me from following them? Qin Yuru asked. Go and see Qi Rongji. Madame D had regained her composure and said coldly. I won't go. Qi Rongji really thinks that she is a miss. Qin Yuru covered her face with her hands and said coldly. Her face was still burning with pain. Go, why not? Isn't it good for Qi Rongji to vent her anger on others? Madame D said with a gloomy face and looked coldly at the backs of the 2 people in front of her. If you don't let me care about Qin Wanru's matter, then make it worse. You and Qi Rongji have talked a lot in the past. Don't tell me you have forgotten how to talk to her. Mother, do you mean to push this matter to Qin Wanru and let Qi Rongji deal with her? Qin Yuru was stunned, but she immediately understood and said happily. In the past, she had done this kind of thing many times. You go. I'll ask someone to invite a doctor to come and take a look at Qi Rongji. It's not a small matter for a girl to fall into the lake. As the master of the mansion, I have to go and see her. Your grandmother can't even protect herself. Madame D sneered and put her hand on her waist. The old woman thought that she could protect the little girl by doing this. She didn't even know if she had the energy to protect anyone. Mother, do you mean that grandmother can't protect that girl? Qin Wanru's eyes suddenly widened. You go and talk to Miss Qi. I'll ask that girl to come and see her later. Madame D looked at her with a faint smile. Qin Wanru had always been a filial granddaughter. This was just right. I understand, Mother. I'll go and see Qi Rongji now. Qin Wanru immediately understood. She put down her hand and said viciously. She turned and went to the courtyard where Qi Rongji changed clothes with her servant girl. Qin Yuru heard clearly when Nanny Duan asked someone to help Qi Rongji change clothes. Seeing Qin Yuru leave, Madame D called her chief servant Maya over and whispered something to her. Maya nodded repeatedly and then left. Qin Yuru went to the courtyard and asked about Qi Rongji's situation. She put on a smile and then entered the room. In the room, Qi Rongji was sitting on a chair and drinking ginger soup. She had already changed clothes. When she saw Qin Yuru come in, she rolled her eyes and ignored her. Sister Qi, do you feel better? Are you okay? If something really happened, how would Mother and I explain it to your family? I can't tell your eldest brother. If I had known that second sister had this intention, I wouldn't have told you where second sister went. Qin Yuru sat on the chair next to Qi Rongji and said in an affectionate voice. Do you mean that all this was arranged by Qin Wanru? Qi Rongji understood. She put down the bowl in her hand and said angrily. Of course it was arranged by second sister. She knew that mother was not her biological mother, so she deliberately made these things. The main reason was that she was dissatisfied with mother. I'm really sorry that Miss Chi got into trouble. Qin Yuru sighed and put Qi Rongji's bowl on the table beside her. Her expression was gloomy. She said that Qi Rongji's trouble today was because Qin Wanru wanted to deal with Madame D and Qi Rongji just happened to be there. Hearing this, Qi Rongji became more and more unhappy. Sister Yuru, are you too useless? You can't even deal with Qin Wanru. Qi Rongji said sarcastically. Grandmother protected her, so mother couldn't do anything. Qin Wanru said helplessly. As she spoke, her eyes turned red. She took a handkerchief to wipe her tears. Grandmother has always liked second sister and never liked me. Even when I was engaged to your brother, she always said that I was not as good as second sister. She even said that she would arrange a marriage for second sister that was much better than mine. Later, she even schemed against my marriage. Are you saying that old grandma also interfered in the marriage between you and my brother? Qi Rongji was furious. Her brother, Qi Tianyu, was the person she respected the most. Otherwise, do you think Qin Wanru would dare to make trouble like this? Was Qin Wanru like this before? Qin Yuru continued to provoke. That bitch, I won't let her go. Qi Rongji suddenly stood up and was about to get even with Qin Wanru. But she was quickly stopped by Qin Yuru. You're in the wrong if you rush to look for second sister at this time. So what? Qin Wanru can't do anything to me. She's just a daughter of a concubine. She really thinks she's so great. Qi Rongji sneered disdainfully. Qin Yuru's words made her mistakenly think that Qin Wanru was not Madame D's daughter but a concubine's daughter. She was just registered under Madame D's name. She had always been arrogant and did not take Qin Wanru seriously. She will definitely come to see you later since you've had such a thing happen to you. Qin Yuru hinted. Qin Yuru's words reminded Qi Rongji. She immediately understood and said coldly, I'll make it so that she can't leave later. Qin Yuru lowered her head and smiled slowly. Qi Rongji had always been overbearing and vicious. She never suffered losses. Once she suffered a little loss, she would play tricks on others. Her mother could not deal with Qin Wanru for the time being, but it did not mean that others could not. When they returned to old grandma's courtyard and entered the room, old grandma coughed hard. Qin Wanru quickly went forward to pat her back and asked anxiously, Grandma, why are you coughing so badly again? Old grandma's coughing problem was also an old problem. In the past, when it was autumn and the air was cold, she would cough. This reminded Qin Wanru of the day old grandma passed away in her previous life. Although her face was sallow and pale, she coughed so much that there was blood at the corner of her mouth. Even outside the room, her coughing sound could be heard. In the end, old grandma passed away and her coughing stopped. At that time, Qin Wanru cried and fainted in front of old grandma's bed. In this life, old grandma's coughing problem had always worried Qin Wanru. When she woke up these days, old grandma did not cough, but now she was coughing so badly. Nanny Duan had already poured a cup of warm water. Qin Wanru took it and brought it to old grandma's lips. Old grandma took a sip and then slowly recovered. She coughed twice in a low voice and looked very pale. Old grandma, did you catch a cold? Usually, at this time in the past, you didn't start to cough. Nanny Duan asked in confusion. Qin Wanru took a handkerchief and carefully wiped the fine sweat on old grandma's forehead. She could not hide the worry in her eyes. I'm fine. Maybe there are too many things these days, and it's a little cold. Old grandma held Qin Wanru's hand and coughed loudly again. This time, she coughed so hard that Qin Wanru's wrist felt painful. Qin Wanru did not move and let old grandma hold her hand to borrow strength. She picked up the cup with the other hand and fed old grandma a sip of warm water. Only after a long while did the old madam recover and relax her grip. Old grandma, you should lie down and rest for a while. Nanny Duan said with a worried face. Madame Dowager nodded helplessly. She had a lot of things to say to Qin Wanru, but now she had no strength to say anything. She felt dizzy and her throat felt fishy. She couldn't even say a word. Qin Wanru and Nanny Duan helped old grandma to bed and covered her with the quilt. When old grandma closed her eyes tiredly, they walked out. Chapter 33. Grandma is asleep now. Qin Wanru recognized that the maid was Maya, Madame D's principal maid, and answered lightly. She is asleep now, what should we do? Maya was so anxious that she paced around. What's the emergency? Qin Wanru frowned and asked. Well, just now Magistrate Lu's people came to ask about Miss Qi, but Miss Qi is in such a condition, what should we do? Maya looked nervous and out of her wits. Madam said that this matter must be handled by Madame Dowager. Miss Qi has always listened to Madame Dowager alone. Grandma was coughing so badly, how could she make Qi Rongji listen to her? Second miss, let me go inside to report to old grandma, and let her decide, okay? Maya was so anxious that she had no choice, and after pacing around a few times, she pleaded to Qin Wanru. Grandma is already asleep, don't disturb her, I'll go and have a look. Qin Wanru looked up at Maya and said. Second miss, then I'll go and report to madam. Maya's eyes lit up, and she said excitedly. After that, she bowed to Qin Wanru respectfully, turned around and left quickly, as if she was not the one who was at a loss just now. Miss. Qin Yu said worriedly, if you go to see Miss Qi now, she will definitely bite you. Qi Rongji had always been cruel, and she would bite people randomly. In the past, Miss had suffered a lot in her hands, and Qin Yu was really worried. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, and there was coldness in her eyes. Since madam wants me to go, I'll go. Don't worry, she can't do anything to me. After saying this, her heart was moved. How could she not see through Madame D's intention? Madame D wanted to send her to the vicious Qi Rongji. She would do as she wished. Madame D wanted to make use of Qi Rongji, and coincidentally, she wanted to make use of Qi Rongji. As for Qi Rongji's intention to humiliate her, she would not let it happen again in this life. But she was surprised that Grandma was fine when she came back, but when she came back, she coughed so badly. How did Madame D know? How did she know that Grandma would cough so badly when she came back, and in order not to be disturbed by Madame D's people, she had to go to see Qi Rongji? Could it be that he had missed something? However, this was not the time to pursue this matter. Qin Wanru buried this question in her heart and took Qin Yu to the courtyard where Qi Rongjia changed her clothes. As soon as she arrived at the gate of the courtyard, she saw two servant girls hurriedly pulling down a servant girl with blood all over her head. Seeing the blood on her forehead, Qin Wanru knew it was Qi Rongji who hit her. In the Ningyuan army general's mansion, Qi Rongji had never treated herself as an outsider. She would beat and scold the maids and old maids who served her without mercy. This was another maid who was being vented on. Seeing her coming, Qi Rongji's servant girl, who was standing in the corridor, hurried to report. After a while, the servant girl lifted the curtain again and came out. She said to Qin Wanru indifferently, "Second Miss Qin, please. Our first miss is waiting for you." After that, he stepped aside and seemed to be waiting for Qin Wanru to go in. Qin Wanru walked to the curtain. The servant girl lifted the curtain and Qin Wanru poked her head in. Suddenly, she withdrew her head and leaned to the side. A bowl smashed right at the place where she had just poked her head in. The thick, hot ginger soup splashed everywhere. It spread out and emitted a strong smell. Being splashed by the hot ginger soup, the servant girl unconsciously screamed and jumped. This bowl of ginger soup was really hot. Looking at the broken bowl on the ground, Qin Wanru looked down and there was more hostility in her eyes. She was ready to smash the bowl on her head. It had been a while since Qi Rongji came over to change her clothes. The ginger soup that was supposed to be served had already been served. She must have drunk it already. Needless to say, the steaming hot ginger soup must have been kept for her. Even if she did not smash her head, her face would be ruined by the boiling hot ginger soup. If the ginger sweat flowed into her eyes, she might not be able to keep her eyes. Qi Rongji was indeed tyrannical and vicious. Of course, the person who prepared this steaming bowl of ginger soup for her was equally vicious. He had tricked her into coming here so that he could use Qi Rongji to destroy her. She wanted to use Qi Rongji to ruin her own life. She stepped in again and her eyes fell on Qi Rongji, who was sitting inside, facing the door. "Bitch, you made me so embarrassed. How dare you come here?" Seeing Qin Wanru come in, Qi Rongji slammed her hand on the table and glared at Qin Wanru. This bitch moved so fast that she actually avoided it. What a waste of such a bowl of boiling hot ginger soup. "Miss Qi, I don't understand what you mean. Why don't I dare to come to my own courtyard?" Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and said calmly, "This is our general's mansion, isn't it?" "Miss Qi, you didn't misunderstand, did you? How dare you speak to me like this?" Qi Rongji was so angry that her face turned red. "Why wouldn't I dare? Miss Qi's words are so unreasonable. Is it because my father's position is not as high as Magistrate Qi's, or is it because Magistrate Qi has something on my father that I can't speak the truth in front of you?" Qin Wanru walked in naturally and looked at Qi Rongji with her head held high. Her tone was calm and sharp. In the past, she had been compromising because she listened to Madame D. In fact, in terms of real strength, the general's mansion with military power was definitely higher than the magistrate's mansion with administrative power. Qi Rongji did not expect Qin Wanru to be so sharp. She was so angry that she could not say anything. "Miss Qi, I am here on behalf of my grandmother to see how you are. She is not feeling well now and can't come. Why did you fall into the lake? Miss Qi, please tell us what happened so that we can give an explanation to the magistrate." Qin Wanru ignored Qi Rongji's fierce eyes and sat on the chair opposite her, looking like she was doing business. "Didn't you deliberately lead me there?" Qi Rongjia gritted her teeth and said. She could not wait to pounce on Qin Wanru and tear her face. "Why should I lead you there? What's in it for me to lead you there?" Qin Wanru said coldly, "I am not the one who broke off the engagement with your elder brother. I am not the one who is afraid that your mansion will make trouble. Why should I look for trouble? I heard that there was a servant across the lake who was about to go into the river to save you. Moreover, I was going to find my grandmother at that time and was not in the waterside pavilion." Qin Wanru knew her temperament and said slowly. Qin Yuru and Madame D could make something out of nothing, so could she. Qi Rongji, who had always been headstrong, was never a reasonable person. "There was a servant who wanted to go into the water to save me?" Qi Rongji's face changed dramatically. In that kind of situation, if a manservant had really saved her, she would have hugged the manservant with wet clothes. Her reputation would have been ruined. Coincidentally, there's an old maid who knows how to swim by the lake. Otherwise, Miss Qi wouldn't be able to sit here and pour ginger soup at this time. After what happened to Big Sister, I'm afraid that Jiangzhou Prefecture would be disgraced again." Qin Wanru said calmly. "Qin Wanru, don't be alarmist. If I find out that this is false, I will tear your mouth and break your legs. Let's see if you dare to talk nonsense in the future." Qi Rongji pointed at Qin Wanru and scolded. This was not a lie. With Qi Rongji's character, she would really do such a thing. She had never suffered a loss before. How could she stop after suffering such a big loss? It's up to you whether you believe it or not. If you don't believe it, you can go to Big Sister's room and look around. Maybe you can find some clues. Qin Wanru stood up, and her face became more and more indifferent. "There is one more thing. First, Miss Qi, please understand that I am the second Miss of General's Mansion, and I have nothing to do with Qi's mansion. If first Miss Qi hurt me, don't think about leaving General's Mansion alive." After warning Qi Rongji, who had always been arrogant and domineering, Qin Wanru turned around and left the room, ignoring Qi Rongji's angry face. She had always been the one to threaten and belittle Qin Wanru. Since when could Qin Wanru step on her head? However, she knew clearly that what Qin Wanru said was true. Qin Wanru had nothing to do with her. She could not hit or scold Qin Wanru as she pleased. But what about Qin Yuru? Qin Yuru owed her family. If she really wanted to deal with her secretly and ruin her reputation in order to defend herself from being ruined, Qin Wanru had every reason to deal with her. Let's go and see first Miss Qin. Qi Rongji felt very wrong today. She slammed the table and stood up. Miss, please wait. It's actually not polite for you to go there like this. Qin Yi, who followed her to General's mansion, pulled her back and reminded her. What's wrong with that? If Qin Yuru really wants to ruin my reputation and deal with me, I will not spare her, Qi Rongji said with hatred. After hearing Qin Wanru's specious words, the more she thought about it, the more she felt that it was Qin Yuru who hurt her. How could she bear it? Miss, first young master asked you to come here to talk to first Miss Qin. If you get into trouble with first Miss Qin again, first young master will be unhappy. Chen Yi knew that Qi Rongji always trusted Qi Tianyu, so she quickly dragged Qi Tianyu out to talk. Then what should I do now? Hearing Chen Yi mention Qi Tianyu, Qi Rongji suppressed her anger and said with hatred. This time, she felt so wronged when she came to General's mansion. Not only did she hate Qin Yuru, but she also vented her anger on Qin Wanru. Miss, when you go to first Miss Qin's room, don't get angry. Just say that you want to discuss with first Miss Qin how to deal with second Miss Qin, and then find a way to find out if first Miss Qin really wants to deal with you. If she really arranged a servant to save you and ruin your reputation, it won't be too late for you to take action. Chapter 34. Qin Wanru, you really keep your promise. I've waited for so long, but I didn't see you. At the entrance of the moon cave, Chu Luchen crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, which happened to block Qin Wanru's way. His handsome eyes were raised high, with the vigor of a teenager, but his pale face showed a kind of morbid handsomeness. After the extreme handsomeness was contaminated with the frailty, it actually made people feel a kind of soul-stirring feeling. Together with the faint smile in his eyes, there was a kind of carelessness, but also a kind of dangerously enchanting. Qin Wanru blinked her eyes and involuntarily took a step back. She felt that if she went up now, she would probably be a cannon fodder. Prince, I don't know when you're going out. Qin Wanru felt that it was better to take the initiative to say it. She should not have offended this prince, right? You don't know if you will come to ask. Chu Luchen raised his eyebrows and asked leisurely. The bright red brocade robe made him more enchanting and colorful. Even though his face was pale and sick, Qin Wanru had to admit that this prince was as handsome as a man coming out of a painting, and the faint ink showed enchanting colors. Something happened in the mansion, and Grandma is sick again. Qin Wanru lowered her head, reached out to pinch the corner of her clothes, and lowered her head in grievance. Chu Luchen walked closer, looked down at her, and saw her black hair. Although the teenager was sick, he was more than a head taller than Qin Wanru. From his angle, Qin Wanru looked thin and small. General's mansion didn't give you food? Why are you so short? The teenager's beautiful face showed a little doubt, and he reached out to touch the top of Qin Wanru's hair. Her hair was very soft, which made him feel like touching his own cat. He praised in his heart, good hair. I'm not short, I'm quite tall. Qin Wanru raised her head innocently, tried to straighten her body, and looked up, trying to give Chu Luchen a tall and straight vision. She didn't think she was short at all. In her previous life, when she was drawing, she was no worse than other ladies, and even a little taller. However, when she raised her head to look at Chu Luchen, she suddenly found that she hadn't drawn a stick yet, so she immediately became listless like a frosted eggplant. Without a stripe, she was indeed a little small. If you're considered tall like this, there won't be anyone short. Chu Luchen mercilessly exposed her misdirection and sneered with a grin. After that, he stopped asking about this topic and shrugged his shoulders indifferently. I heard that someone in your mansion fell into the water today and it was very noisy. Could it be you? It's not me. It's a miss from another mansion. Qin Wanru said honestly. Your mansion is quite lively. There is something interesting to watch every few days. Good, really good. Chu Luchen smiled and said in a very good mood. At this time, he looked more like an elegant child. Although calling him child seemed to make him a little old, he was just a young boy after all. But even so, Qin Wanru still felt that he was the kind of child described in the book. Child Ryu was talking about him. Of course, this was when he was in a very good mood. It was good to hear that something happened in his mansion from time to time. Qin Wanru didn't know whether she should laugh or cry. She could only pull a long face and agree. You're so young. How can you laugh like this? You look better when you cry. Unexpectedly, this man disliked her again. He reached out to pull Qin Wanru's little face and used his strength mercilessly. It hurts. Qin Wanru was hurt. She cried out in pain and reached out to slap Chu Liuchen's hand heavily. She wanted to slap his hand away. This time, Qin Wanru couldn't control her strength and slapped him heavily. Qi! You're so strong. Chu Luchen didn't expect that Qin Wanru really dared to slap him. He cried out in pain and put down his hand. Then he looked at his hand and screamed. His skin was very white and almost transparent. The place where he was slapped was very obvious and immediately turned red. Qin Wanru felt very guilty when she saw it. She stepped back nervously and swallowed hard. She reached out to point at her face and stammered, My face is also red. It hurts too. Her skin was also much whiter and more tender than ordinary people. If she pulled it with a little strength, she would definitely blush. In order to share her guilty conscience, she hurriedly used herself as an analogy. This was actually to embolden herself. She dared to slap Prince Chen's hand. She didn't have such courage. This was also a euphemistic explanation for why she slapped him. She felt very guilty. Chu Luchen looked up at Qin Wanru's face. Indeed, there were 2 red spots on her face. Her white and tender little face looked pitiful. Her sparkling eyes were black and white. Her eyes were black and white, and she was biting her cherry red lips with some timidity. She looked like a little girl. She was soft, weak, and gorgeous. Chu Luchen suddenly felt that it was not a big deal that his hand was slapped. This girl also blushed because of his slap. She was a little silly but also a little cute. She was different from the arrogant princesses he saw in the palace in the past, and different from those ladies from aristocratic families who pretended to be elegant. This was a real reaction. How could she not fight back when she was bullied? Tell me, will there be any trouble in your mansion tomorrow? Chu Luchen decided to be generous and not blame her for slapping him. He asked with his eyebrows slightly relaxed. Well, there might be. Qin Wanru said hesitantly. According to her estimation, Qi Rongji was not a good person. She didn't make trouble on the spot, which meant that she could endure until tomorrow. She planned to make a good plan before making trouble. You still have something to do tomorrow. Where will you make trouble? Chu Luchen was interested. It was just a casual question, but he actually got an answer. You can see it at the place where you first met me. Qin Wanru thought for a while and decided to tell the truth. Okay, I'll go early tomorrow morning. Chu Luchen said with great interest. He rubbed his hands deliberately, as if he was ready to do something big. Qin Wanru looked at him speechlessly. This Prince Chen would eventually seize the power of the country. He must be ruthless and cunning, and his mind should be full of national affairs. Why was he so free at this time that he actually liked to watch some girls' fun? Well, what about the country? Your Highness, did you come to Jiangzhou for something big this time? Qin Wanru couldn't help blinking her eyes and asked. What big thing could I have? I just asked for a free job. I'm just walking around to see if there is Fenghua glazed lamp. Other than that, I'm just looking at the scenery, walking around, and looking for some fun. Chu Luqian said with a smile. He took 2 steps forward and suddenly turned back. He waved at Qin Wanru and said, Come here, I'll show you a place. Qin Wanru bit her cherry lips. She really wanted to ask, Isn't this a puppy? She obediently took 2 steps forward and followed him. Not just looking for our Fenghua glazed lamp? Qin Wanru asked after running 2 steps. Who knows you have it? It's not a very rare thing. Some families have it. Chu Luqian shook his red brocade robe, strode forward, and answered casually. So, he didn't come to look for me on purpose. It's just a coincidence. He casually tricked me and I happened to come here. Qin Wanru sighed helplessly and continued to trot a few steps. Chu Luqian's steps were very big, and she had short legs. She couldn't keep up with him after a few steps. When they came to a turn, Chu Luqian also found this. He stopped and waited for her to come. He reached out to hold her hand and said helplessly, You're short and your legs are short. What will happen when you grow up? You can't even marry a husband. You're so short and short. Who will marry you? After saying this, he especially glanced at her with disgust and tooted twice. His bad attitude made her angry from the bottom of her heart. Qin Wanru told herself not to be angry. This Prince Chen was not at the age where he was peerless and aloof from the world. He was just a teenager who hadn't grown up yet. He was sick and arrogant with a sharp tongue. She was older than him in both of her lives, so she shouldn't lower herself to his level. Prince, I won't marry if I can't get married. Why do you care so much about other people's business? Although she told herself not to be angry, Qin Wanru bit her cherry lips and couldn't help saying. If you can't get married, you have to be an old maid for the rest of your life. It looks pretty miserable. Chu Luqian said very straightforwardly. He squinted his eyes and looked her up and down again. He still felt that she was small and inconspicuous. Prince, it's too early to tell me this kind of thing. Qin Wanru felt that she wanted to hit him, but when she saw the back of Chu Luqian's hand was still red, she immediately lost all her anger. That was a subconscious reaction. She really didn't dare to do it again. A tiger swatted a fly on its head. This was not just a tiger, but a real dragon. So she was very timid and didn't dare to do it. Let's go, let's go. It's a waste of time to talk. Chu Luqian's voice suddenly became unhappy. He turned around and ran forward with Qin Wanru. This time, Qin Wanru directly didn't have the strength to speak. She tried her best to keep up with his footsteps. She followed him to turn several corners and then stopped panting. After stopping, Chu Luqian let go of her hand. Qin Wanru put her hands on her knees and gasped loudly without any posture. She felt that she couldn't catch her breath. It's not so exaggerated. I've been sick all the time. I'm not as tired as you. Chu Luqian was also gasping. He gasped for breath with the support of a pillar on one side. His face was as white as a piece of paper, showing a sense of illness and weakness. He was also in a state of being out of breath, but he still forced himself to say something to show off. Qin Wanru gasped for 2 times and came to her senses. She turned to look at the prince, and her expression immediately changed. She hurriedly went to help him, but she saw that his lips were also as white as a piece of paper. He covered his chest with one hand and seemed to be about to faint. Qin Wanru hurriedly reached out and patted his back, and then stroked his face a few times. Finally, the prince's face looked a little better, but his lips were still dim and pale. Chapter 35. Seeing that he was almost fine, Qin Wanru raised her head and looked around. Then she found that Chu Luchen took her to her own garden. He was referring to a potted flower at the innermost part of the flower bed. It was not difficult to call it a potted flower because there were no flowers or flower buds. It was just a green seedling. It was very small, and there were only a few of them. Moreover, it looked a little withered. It made people feel that these seemingly green seedlings were about to die. Seeing these seedlings without buds, Qin Wanru's face changed. Her hanging fingers trembled uncontrollably, and she looked around subconsciously. When there was no one, she withdrew her gaze. Why was this pot of flower here? When did there be such a pot of flower in her mansion? In her previous life, she had never found it in her mansion. Why did she see this pot of flower in her rebirth? It was that person's favorite flower, but shouldn't that person be in the capital city now? Before she came to the capital city, she had never seen him. Her nose was slightly sour, and she bit her lips to suppress the sadness. Although she had only been with that person for a short month, he was the only warmth she had since she came to the capital city in her previous life. He gave her the only tolerance and kindness, but after all, he couldn't fight against fate. Did many things change because of the intervention of Prince Chen in this life? Tang Qianyan. Qin Wanru composed herself and finally answered. Clap, clap, clap. Chu Luchen applauded and laughed, but there was a faint light flashing in his eyes. Good, good. I didn't expect that the remote Jiangzhou would know this pot of Tang Qianyan. I thought no one would know it, but I underestimated you, little girl. This pot of Tang Qianyan doesn't belong to our mansion, does it? Qin Wanru said calmly. Thinking about it carefully, the climate in Jiangzhou was actually not suitable for the growth of Tang Qianyan, so it looked like it wanted to die. Tang Qianyan was actually a type of orchid, but the pot in front of him clearly did not have any branches or teeth. The Tang Qianyan that could bloom in autumn now did not even have a single flower bud. It looked like a pot of weeds, extremely unremarkable. But in fact, if a flower bud was really sprouted, it would bloom at the top of the branch like a swallow flying diagonally. It was extremely elegant and beautiful. Moreover, this kind of flower shape would be slightly different depending on the plant. The better the Tang Qianyan, the more beautiful and elegant the flower shape would be. Of course they are not from your mansion. I brought them here. Chu Luchen said proudly. Your Highness brought a pot of flowers out of the capital. Qin Wanru blinked her watery eyes and said in astonishment. No wonder this potted flower didn't know whether it was alive or not. It would be lucky if it could survive all the way to Jiangzhou. I didn't bring it from the capital. I found it here. It looks like if it blooms, it should be very good. It's even more beautiful than the ones in the capital. Chu Luchen crossed his chest with one hand and touched his sharp chin with the other. His eyes were full of love and he seemed to be in a good mood. Qin Wanru secretly slandered him. It was good enough that this pot of Tang Qianyan didn't die. It didn't have a bud until now. It was obvious that it couldn't grow. Do you still owe me? Chu Luchen squinted at Qin Wanru and said playfully. He was in a good mood and raised his eyebrows and smiled lightly. Qin Wanru suddenly had a very bad feeling. You are a prince. I am not only a woman but also a young woman. Qin Wanru bowed humbly. Looking at her cautious and anxious expression, her tender and fair little face tensed up nervously. Her big watery eyes seemed to be able to speak, with a hint of timidity, secretly peeping at his expression. The more he looked at this little girl, the more adorable she was, and she was very strange and clever. Looking at her now, no one would have thought that this little girl would smash the bridal sedan chair fiercely. Chu Luchen was amused. Don't you need a little girl to take care of this kind of thing? Do you need a man like me to take care of it? Qin Wanru was stunned for a moment and bit her lips. Prince, I have never taken care of flowers and plants. Even some good ones will die. How could it die? Chu Luchen smiled. His eyebrows and eyes were shining. He was really handsome and charming. It will really die. I've nurtured many pots to death. Even the easiest ones to nurture can only die in my hands. Qin Wanru felt that it was better to tell the truth. It was not a lie. Qin Wanru didn't know what was going on. Qin Wanru had never been good at raising flowers. Any flowers that were easy to be raised would either die or be disabled in her hands. Even those who were lucky enough to survive would never blossom. It was not easy for them to just stay alive. If I take care of this Tang Qianyan, I am afraid that you will never see it bloom. Qin Wanru thought it was better to give up this trouble as soon as possible. Qin Wanru, do you mean that you refuse to take care of this potted flower for me? Chu Luqian said softly with a gentle smile. There was even a sense of elegance between his eyebrows and eyes, which made people feel that he was an immortal from the ninth heaven who came to the mortal world. Any compliments were too much for him at this time. I am afraid that your favorite flower will die. Qin Wanru anxiously lowered her head and dared not to look at his swaying handsome face. If you can't take care of it, you will have to pay with your life. I don't know if this flower can survive. The smile beside her ear was still gentle with a sense of ridicule, but the meaning in his words was cold to the bone. Qin Wanru felt a chill on her back and was sweating. She didn't think this prince was joking. This prince had always been ruthless. The so-called tenderness for the fairer sex didn't exist in him. After witnessing his ruthlessness and bloodshed in the previous life, Qin Wanru felt more and more uneasy. This unpredictable and temperamental evil star was not docile and harmless. The unparalleled handsome appearance was just a performance of his charm. Even if he was sick and weak, this evil star's lethality was 100% poisonous. Prince, I really can't take care of this flower. Please let me go. Qin Wanru pleaded again. Tang Qianyan was the most difficult to take care of. Even in the capital city with suitable climate, it was difficult to take care of it. Moreover, she had always been a little handicapped, so how could she take care of Tang Qianyan well? In the previous life, when Qin Wanru came to the capital city, this Tang Qianyan was the most famous flower in the capital city. Each mansion had a few pots of precious flowers, and they would often take them out to compare. Even because a pot of the best Tang Qianyan bloomed, they would specially invite people to enjoy the flowers and hold a banquet, which was very lively. It could be seen that people in the capital city thought highly of this Tang Qianyan. If I let you go, who will let my Tang Qianyan go? The young man raised his eyebrows and his voice became cold. At this moment, his fairy-like appearance immediately turned into the coldness of Azura. He threatened and said, Qin Wanru, I will give you that seal. You take care of this Tang Qianyan for me. If you can't take care of it, you know what will happen. After saying that, he took out the bluegrass seal from his arms, held Qin Wanru's little hand, opened her sweaty palm, put the seal in her hand, and closed her palm considerately. This seal is returned to you by me. This flower will be taken care of by you. I am also tired now, so I will go to have a rest. Chu Luqian raised his eyebrows and smiled again with a bit of laziness and comfort. Then he loosened Qin Wanru's hand, turned around and strode away. Prince. Qin Wanru opened her mouth. What? Do you have any objection? Chu Luqian stopped and turned around to look at her with a faint light flashing in his eyes. No objection, but I can only guarantee that it will live. Qin Wanru swallowed with difficulty and gave in. Okay, it's good enough that it can live, I am not picky. Chu Luqian was satisfied with Qin Wanru's understanding. The coldness at the bottom of his eyes gradually disappeared, and he turned around and left with a laugh. This girl was really good. Not only was she good at stirring up trouble, but she was also flexible. She even slyly used her young age to show weakness. However, when it was time to stretch out her claws, she did not hesitate at all and neatly made people bleed with one move. Not bad, he had never seen such a fun little girl. He wanted to raise such a cunning little girl. What should he do? In the end, Qin Wanru asked Qin Yu to take the flower back to her garden. Although there were people taking care of it in her garden, it seemed that they were just taking care of it as an ordinary flower. It seemed that if they continued to take care of it like this, it would really die. She guessed that Chu Luchen should have gotten this flower by chance, and then he took it and put it in his garden. He probably would not tell anyone what the characteristics of this flower were. The servants taking care of the garden naturally did not know that this was a precious Tang Qianyan, and they took care of it like ordinary flowers in Jiangzhou. After taking care of it for so long, this flower was going to die. In fact, this flower was not very fond of water, so it did not need to be watered every day. It only needed to be watered every 3 to 5 days. It liked the sun, but it could not be exposed to the sun. In the morning, it needed to be taken out to dry, and in the afternoon, it could be taken out again. Although it did not need to be watered a lot, it must be watered thoroughly every time, and try not to water the leaves, but directly to its roots. With such a spoiled habit, this flower was very difficult to raise. The so-called, "the sun is too strong," sometimes did not only mean at noon. This knowledge was taught by that person in her last life, but this kind of idle mood to play with flowers and plants only lasted for a month. But even if it was only a short time, Qin Wanru still firmly remembered the habits of Tang Qianyan that he told her. When returning to her yard, Qin Wanru asked Qin Yu to put this flower in front of her window sill facing south. Summer had passed, and this time was not the time of extreme heat, so it was the best time to dry Tang Qianyan. Qin Wanru really could not guarantee that she could make Tang Qianyan bloom, but it should not be a big problem for it not to die. Thinking about this, Qin Wanru calmed down a little. After arranging the flower properly, she went to Madame Dowager's yard again. Madame Dowager was still sleeping and still coughing. She had invited a doctor to boil medicine, saying that her old illness had recurred, and asked Madame Dowager to take a good rest and try not to worry about it. Chapter 36. Second Miss Qin, our miss would like to invite you to Elder Mrs. Place tomorrow to be a witness. It was Chun Yi, Qi Rongji's servant girl. She smiled and bowed to Qin Wanru and told her the purpose of her visit. What witness? Qin Wanru asked calmly. If our miss and Elder Miss Qin quarrel and someone asks, "Second miss," please tell them the truth. Our miss will go to Elder Miss's room tomorrow to find evidence, Chun Yi said with a smile. Your miss wants to make trouble for Elder's sister. Qin Wanru frowned. Her words were so direct that Chun Yi didn't know how to answer. She gave a hollow laugh and explained in a euphemistic way, our miss is not going to make trouble for Elder Mississippi. She just wants to know if what Elder Miss said is true. She broke off the engagement with our young master and what happened today. Qin Wanru raised her black and white eyes, looked at Chun Yi, and said lightly, so, I'm still going to make trouble. Chun Yi was speechless. She really thought that second Miss Qin was not good at talking. Her words made people speechless. Tell your miss that I have to take care of Grandma tomorrow. I don't have time to accompany her to make trouble. Tell her not to make trouble herself. This is our general's mansion. No one can control what Miss Qi does in her own mansion. But in our mansion, mother and elder sister will not allow her to make trouble. Qin Wanru said coldly. The warning in her words was obvious. She was almost telling Qi Rongji not to make trouble, or Madame D and Qin Yuru would not let her go. Chun Yi couldn't help getting angry at her words. She bowed to Qin Wanru coldly and turned to leave angrily. Miss, will Chun Yi complain to Miss Qi about you? Seeing Chun Yi leave angrily, Qin Yu asked worriedly. Yes. Qin Wanru nodded casually and turned to go to her yard. Then what should we do? With Miss Qi's temper, will she rush over immediately? Qin Yu followed closely behind Qin Wanru, feeling a little anxious. First Miss Qi had always been arrogant. In the past, when she was with Qin Wanru, she would never be polite to Qin Wanru. She would scold or beat Qin Wanru according to her mood. However, every time Madam and First Miss Chi stood on her side, and Qin Wanru always suffered losses. This time, she won't. Qin Wanru said confidently. Qi Rongji was not really stupid. It was only because Madame D and Qin Yuru had been allowing her to deal with Qin Wanru that she became more and more arrogant in Qin's mansion. But now she was not on good terms with Madame D and Qin Yuru. Moreover, she was no longer the Qin Wanru who was used to being bullied. Then she won't come looking for you. That's good, that's good. Qin Yu was relieved and patted her chest. He will come for me, and he will definitely come. Qin Wanru said as she entered the room. Qin Yu was stunned for a moment and hurried to follow her in. Miss, do you mean Miss Chi will still come to trouble you? Yes, she will come tomorrow. Qin Wanru smiled and sat down on the chair. She picked up a book, which was also a medical book that she found herself. Qin Yu did not leave but stood beside Qin Wanru. She asked in confusion, will Miss Chi go to old grandma's place to wait for you tomorrow? She just heard from Miss that she was going to serve old grandma tomorrow. Of course she will go, and she will go earlier than us. She will find a way to persuade grandma to let me go with her. She needs a scapegoat to deal with Qin Yuru. Qin Wanru smiled more calmly. She flipped open the book in front of her and her eyes fell on a picture in the book. She was not worried about what Qi Rongji would do next. She wanted to use the situation to make Qi Rongji angry. So are you going or not, miss? Qin Yu paused and asked anxiously. Of course I'll go. Since Qi Rongji has been asking me to go, I'll just take it as going to the scene to watch the fun. The bigger the mess, the better. Now there were only a few people in the mansion who knew that she was not Madame D's biological daughter. People outside the mansion did not know, so she could spread the news through Qi Rongji's mouth. There was a herb in the picture, but Qin Wanru somehow felt it was familiar. But when she looked at it carefully, she did not know it. She raised her eyes and looked at the note next to it carefully again, July fragrance. It has 3 branches of peanuts and is golden in color. The flower is small and inconspicuous. The rhizome is divided into 7 branches and is thin and pointed. The rhizome is spherical. It blooms every July and August, so it is called July fragrance. The rhizome and flower can be used as medicine to cure hemoptysis due to deficiency of qi. Why did this picture feel so familiar, but she just couldn't remember. It seemed to be something very important, but when she thought about it carefully, she couldn't find any basis for it. She stretched out her hand and rubbed her forehead. After being reborn, she also discovered some problems. There were some things that she couldn't remember in her previous life, and it was very vague. Could it be that the fragrance of July was one of the important things that he had blurred out? Miss, please have some tea. Seeing Qin Wanru frowning, Qin Yu hurried to make a cup of tea. Qin Wanru reached out and rubbed her eyebrows again. She took the tea from Qin Yu and took a sip. Then she turned her eyes back to July fragrance. She really felt that she had seen it before. Or maybe she did not, but she should know about it. But in her last life, she did not think that she needed this medicine. Miss, what's wrong? Are you worried that Miss Chi will use you tomorrow? Qin Yu saw Qin Wanru rubbing her eyebrows and asked worriedly. Qin Wanru shook her head and reached out to fold the page of July fragrance. Then she closed the book and took another sip of tea. He picked up the cup of tea beside him and took another sip. Then, he stared blankly at the rising smoke in front of him. She wanted to learn medicine. It seemed that she should go to Jingxin Monastery. Suddenly, she thought of the day when the master of Jingxin Monastery asked about the powder on her wound. She had not asked her grandmother about this. She would ask her tomorrow. But she did not know why the master of Jingxin Monastery would ask who applied the powder on her wound. Could it be that there was some secret behind it? Chun Yi was Qi Rongji's principal servant girl, and one who was highly valued by Qi Rongji. In the past, she was not only respected in Magistrate Qi's mansion, but even in General's mansion, no one dared to look down on her. But now she was blocked by Qin Wanru's words again and again, and the meaning of the words after that was more like ridicule. Chun Yi was very angry, so she told Qi Rongji exactly what she said. What does she mean? Qi Rongji heard this and hit the table angrily, and shouted. Miss, I think second miss is definitely afraid to go there. Chun Yi was angry and felt uncomfortable. She rolled her eyes and said. If she doesn't want to go, I will let her go. She can't avoid it even if she wants to. Qi Rongji sneered. Didn't Qin Wanru say that she would go to old grandma's place tomorrow? Then she would go to old grandma's courtyard first and then look for Qin Yuru. After making up this idea, she planned to go to old grandma's courtyard to stop Qin Yuru the next day. When she arrived at Ningyuan Army General's mansion, she said that she would stay for a few days, so she did not go back. The two families were close, and Qi Rongji often stayed in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. The next morning, Qi Rongji got up early. After washing up, she brought Chun Yi to old grandma's courtyard to pay her respects. Although old grandma had already woken up, she did not get up. She was leaning on the bed and chatting with Nanny Duan. Hearing that Qi Rongji was here, old grandma frowned, but still asked someone to invite Qi Rongji in. After Qi Rongji came in, she bowed to old grandma and said hypocritically, Old grandma, are you feeling better today? I'm fine. I'm getting old, and there are always some problems. Old grandma coughed twice in a low voice and said in a low voice. Because she had coughed a lot, her voice was not loud at this time. Old grandma, you need to take good care of your body, especially now that the weather is getting cold, Qi Rongji said. Her eyes wandered around, but she did not see Qin Wanru. Knowing that she was much earlier than her, she suddenly became complacent. There was no way for Qin Wanru to avoid her. Seeing that Qi Rongji's eyes wandered around while talking to her, old grandma knew that Qi Rongji was just trying to save face, so she did not have the energy to see her. She leaned back weakly and said, I'm getting old, and it's very tiring to lean for a while. Now I feel tired again. Of course, she meant that Qi Rongji should go back. Old grandma, I'm really sorry about what happened yesterday. I fell into the lake yesterday, and for a while. Qi Rongji did not seem to understand what old grandma meant. She sat down and pinched her handkerchief guiltily. I really feel sorry for hitting First Miss yesterday, so I want to apologize to First Miss today. Miss Qi, you're too polite. You and Yuru are like sisters, and it's fine as long as the misunderstanding is cleared up. Old grandma coughed twice in a low voice and comforted her helplessly. She could not see that Miss Qi was regretful at all, and she was pretending to express her guilt as usual. Old grandma had seen this many times, so she really did not think much of it. However, what was different from the past was that today, it was because of Qin Yuru being beaten up. In the past, after Qi Rongji beat or bullied Qin Wanru, she would immediately show such a look of regret and hope for the best. Her beloved granddaughter was beaten up by Qi Rongji, and old grandma really didn't like her fake look of guilt. In the past, Madame D and Qin Yuru repeatedly said that it was just a small quarrel between children, and it was not a big deal. Even if old grandma was dissatisfied, she could not say anything, otherwise, it would be seen as the big bullying the small, and it would also destroy the friendship between the two families. Old grandma, second miss is here to see you. Someone outside the room reported. As expected, Qin Wanru came. Qi Rongji secretly thought to herself, and a trace of tyrannical pride flashed across her face. She now hated the Qin sisters as much as she did. Later, she would definitely make Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru suffer. Chapter 37. Invite second miss in. Old grandma said. Qin Wanru came in with Qin Yu. She first bowed to old grandma and then walked to the bed. She stretched out her white and tender little hand and gently pressed on old grandma's forehead, and then on her own forehead. She smiled sweetly and said, It's not hot. Old grandma did this when she was sick in the past. At this time, it was even more heartwarming for a little girl like her to do this. It might be more considerate than a simple question. I'm fine. It's just an old problem. Old grandma laughed and coughed in a low voice. She reached out and pulled Qin Wanru to sit by the bed. Grandma, I didn't cough like this at this time in the past, and the cough wasn't so serious. After Qin Wanru laughed, her little face tensed up and she said with a little worry. She always felt that something was wrong. It's nothing serious. I'm getting older, and I'm getting worse every year. Old grandma laughed and gently patted Qin Wanru's hand. She said lovingly, Zhuozhuo has grown up. How can I not get older? It's normal that I'm getting older every year. How can it be normal? Zhuozhuo just feels that it's not normal. His words were filled with childishness, which made the old lady laugh even louder. Then, she started coughing again. Qin Wanru hurried to get close to old grandma and carefully massaged her back. Old grandma is getting old. It's really not a big deal for her to cough a few times. Wanru, since you're here, accompany me to apologize to your big sister. Qi Rongji came here today to stop Qin Wanru. Now that she saw Qin Wanru talking to old grandma enthusiastically, she suddenly became impatient. You can deal with the matter between you and big sister. I want to accompany grandma. Qin Wanru said without looking back. She reached out and gently patted old grandma's back. Hey, how could you say that? Be careful. Qi Rongji despised Qin Wanru the most. When she heard Qin Wanru refuting her words, she immediately got angry and stood up, ready to lose her temper. But when her eyes met Madame Dowager's eyes, she stopped immediately. After a pause, she smiled and said, Wanru, I slapped your big sister accidentally yesterday. She must not want to see me now. Please help me. The relationship between our two mansions has always been good. You don't want me to be estranged from your big sister, do you? Madame Dowager said with a smile. She knew how to disguise herself in front of the old mistress. Her words were vicious. If Qin Wanru did not accompany her, it meant that she deliberately wanted her and Qin Yuru to be estranged from each other and deliberately cause discord between the two mansions. It would be a great disadvantage for the girl and she might even be criticized by others in the future. No good family would be willing to marry such a troublemaker. A cold light flashed in Qin Wanru's eyes. In front of others, Qi Rongji always knew what to say to drag her into trouble. It was obviously Qi Rongji's fault, but after hearing what she said, it seemed that Qin Wanru was wrong. Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes and her long eyelashes trembled. She looked at Qi Rongji and was about to speak, but her hand was pulled by the old mistress. Zhuozhuo, accompany Miss Qi to your elder sister's place. After she apologizes, this matter will be over. Miss Qi can also go home in peace. This was old mistress's way of rejecting a guest. What she meant was to let Qin Wanru accompany Qi Rongji. After that, Qi Rongji did not need to stay in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. After that, the two families could do whatever they wanted and not be too close. Yes, Grandma. Since old mistress had said so, Qin Wanru naturally nodded. First Miss Qi, please wait outside. I have something to tell Zhuozhuo. Old mistress said to Qi Rongji politely. Qi Rongji had achieved her goal, so she was certainly obedient at this time. Second miss, then I will wait for you outside. After saying that, she walked out arrogantly with her head held high. She did not even say goodbye to old mistress. This kind of upbringing was really not flattering. Zhuozhuo, be careful when you go. If she causes any trouble again, don't be polite to her. Anyway, the two families have quarreled so much that it can't be the same as before. After Qi Rongji left, old mistress whispered to Qin Wanru, for fear that Qin Wanru would suffer losses this time. Old mistress also saw clearly that this time, because of Qin Yuru's matter, even if the two families maintained a smiling face on the surface, in fact, it was only on the surface. In this case, Why would they ask their beloved granddaughter to compromise? Grandma, rest assured, I will be careful. Qin Wanru nodded and reached out to take a cushion for old mistress to cushion her. Grandma, when I fainted for the second time, who was the one who bandaged my arm again? Where did the powder come from? The first time was when she bandaged her arm, and the second time was when Chu Luchin pressed her hand down heavily. When she woke up, she was already in old mistress's room. The second time. Old mistress was confused for a moment. Old mistress, it was when I came to ask someone to help miss to rest in your room. Qin Yu reminded her. That day, after Qin Wanru fainted, she was taken to a pavilion outside by Chu Liuchen's guards. Qin Yu couldn't help Qin Wanru by herself, so she had to ask someone from old mistress's yard to help her get Qin Wanru to old mistress's room. Zhuozhua, at that time, didn't you just apply the medicine? What medicine did you change? Old mistress asked in confusion. But there was blood. Qin Wanru suddenly felt uncertain. At that time, Chu Luchin pressed his hand on her wound so hard that she seemed to see a trace of blood on her arm before she fainted. But when she woke up again, the wound was clean, and it was obvious that it had been bandaged again. When you came back, there was no blood on your hand. Old mistress said with certainty. There must be an error. Could it be that Chu Luchin changed the medicine for her? Qin Wanru's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly, she felt that she had made a mistake. Qin Yu was also confused. In fact, she was in a panic at that time, so she didn't notice whether there was blood on Qin Wanru's hand or not. Later, when she came to old mistress's place, old mistress asked her to go back to the yard. She really didn't know whether the cloth on Qin Wanru's hand was changed or not, and if it was changed, who did it? If it wasn't changed, then forget it. I thought it was changed again. It seemed to be quite painful at that time. Since old mistress didn't know, Qin Wanru didn't say anything more to avoid old mistress worrying. This girl, how can it not hurt when her hand is injured? Old mistress touched Qin Wanru's hand, feeling sorry for her. Grandma, then I'll go with Miss Qi, but I'll have to trouble you to send someone to invite people from Qi's mansion to come here, in case they make trouble later, it will be our mansion's fault again. Qin Wanru said with a smile. All right. I'll ask someone to invite the magistrate's wife here. Old mistress thought for a while and nodded. No matter what the result of the apology was, it was no longer appropriate for Qi Rongji to live in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Moreover, Qi Rongji didn't look like someone who would apologize in a polite manner. When the people from Qi's mansion come here later, let them come directly to Big Sister's yard. Qin Wanru stood up and said. Zhuozhua, go ahead, Grandma understands. Old mistress waved her hand. Since everything had been arranged, Qin Wanru left old mistress's room. Why are you only coming out now? Hurry up and leave. Qi Rongji, who was guarding outside, said impatiently. Anyway, she didn't like Qin Wanru very much. She was suppressing her temper just for her own sinister plot. A cold light flashed in Qin Wanru's eyes. She ignored her and walked towards the gate of the yard with Qin Yu. Qin Wanru, what do you mean? Seeing that Qin Wanru ignored her, Qi Rongji immediately couldn't suppress her temper. When she saw Qin Wanru walking past her, she immediately reached out and wanted to give Qin Wanru a slap. This was what she usually did to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru reached out and grabbed her hand, and then flung her to the side with force. Qi Rongji didn't expect Qin Wanru to resist. She staggered a few steps and almost fell. She was 2 years older than Qin Wanru, so she was taller and heavier than Qin Wanru. However, she was still flung away by Qin Wanru. When she stood still, she immediately became furious. Qin Wanru, what do you want? What do you want? Qin Wanru stood still. Even though she was a head shorter than Qi Rongji, she didn't show any weakness. She said coldly, First Miss Qi, this is the general's mansion, and it's a general's mansion where no one welcomes you. do you really think that we're afraid of you? Qin Wanru bluntly attacked her. She knew that Qi Rongji was vicious and never showed mercy. Qin Wanru was the only one who dealt with people, and there was never a time when she was at a disadvantage. However, she suffered such a big loss yesterday, and now the target was Qin Yuru and her daughter. Therefore, she wanted to deal with Qin Yuru the most, and would not really waste time here. Let's go see your good big sister. Qi Rongji said, gritting her teeth. Qin Wanru's words led all the vicious anger to Qin Yuru. Her main goal now was to deal with Qin Yuru. Although Qin Wanru couldn't escape, if she really quarreled with Qin Wanru now, she wouldn't be able to go to Qin Yuru's place. Seeing that Qi Rongji had suppressed her anger, Qin Wanru did not greet her. She turned and walked forward. They were not only at odds with each other's hearts, but also their faces. Qi Rongji followed closely, and their servant girls followed their masters to Qin Yuru's courtyard. After they left, the old maids sent by old grandma hurried to Qi's mansion. The two houses were actually not far apart. Qin Yuru just got out of bed, and she didn't plan to go to old grandma's courtyard to greet her. She planned to go to Madame D's place later to discuss how to make Qi Rongji deal with Qin Wanru. It would be best if Qi Rongji could viciously cripple Qin Wanru or ruin Qin Wanru's face to vent her anger. After washing up, the servant girls and old maids served breakfast. First Miss Qi and second Miss are here. A servant girl came in and reported. Qin Yuru was stunned for a moment, but she still nodded and said, "Let them in." Her eyes fell on the hot porridge in front of her, and an idea came to her mind. A sinister smile appeared on her face, and she ordered Mei Shui beside her, "Get some hot porridge for the two misses. Since they are here, let's have breakfast together. It's early in the morning, and the weather is getting cold. Have some hot porridge to warm up, the hotter the better." Chapter 38. Hearing that she was invited, Qi Rongji strode forward and entered the room. "Sister Qi, come and have porridge with us. This is the tribute rice your brother sent last time. It's especially glutinous and fragrant." Qin Yuru came over and held Qi Rongji's hand intimately. He ignored Qin Wanru, who came in behind Qi Rongji, as if he did not see her. Qin Wanru glanced at her coldly and her eyes fell on the 3 bowls of porridge on the table. The steaming porridge looked really appetizing. "Big brother really treats you the best." Qi Rongji snorted but did not sit down. She turned her head and pushed Qin Yuru's hand away unhappily. "Big brother treats you so well. How can you let him down and want to break off the engagement with him?" I actually don't know what's going on. I don't know where the box came from." Qin Yuru's face changed slightly, but then she lowered her head with tears in her eyes. She threw the topic to Qin Wanru. She and Madame D had discussed it. They would insist that they didn't know and say that they were framed. "Second Miss, where did the box you asked my brother to find come from?" Qi Rongji turned to Qin Wanru and asked fiercely, as if she was going to interrogate her. "Big sister, it's in the room. How would I know where it came from?" Qin Wanru answered unhurriedly. Then she tilted her head slightly and looked at Qin Yuru. She asked with a little confusion, "Big sister, do you want to get engaged to the first young master of the Qi family again?" Qin Yuru's face stiffened. She hurriedly said vaguely, "Things have already happened. We have to wait for a while." The meaning of her words was that since the engagement had been broken off, even if the two families were to get engaged again, it would have to go through the storm. It sounded like she was interested in getting engaged with Magistrate Qi, but both Qin Wanru and Qi Rongji could hear the meaning of evasion in her words. Neither of them was Qi Tianyu, so they were not fooled by Qin Yuru's words. "So, big sister, do you want to book it or not?" Qin Wanru continued to ask with a smile as if she did not hear the excuse in Qin Yuru's words. "Second sister, our marriage is decided by our parents. How can we decide it ourselves? Although there are only 3 of us now, it is unreasonable to say these things behind our backs." Qin Yuru reprimanded Qin Wanru sincerely, as if she was really polite and trustworthy. Big sister, do you mean that if my mother still wants to be engaged to Duke Yong's mansion, we will follow my mother's decision? Qin Wanru was like a child who really didn't like the affairs of the world and asked foolishly. Qin Yuru clenched her fists hard under her sleeves, but she smiled gently. She gestured to Qin Wanru and said, "Second sister, don't say such unruly words. Sit down and have some porridge with us." There were 3 bowls of porridge on the table. It was obvious that they had eaten it early. There's enough for 3. Qin Yuru, tell me clearly. Do you despise my elder brother and want to marry someone better? Qi Rongji snorted and said. She had already heard that Qin Yuru obviously wanted to kick her elder brother away and get engaged to Duke Yong's mansion in the capital city. Her elder brother was still happily planning to get engaged to Ning Yuan army general's mansion after a period of time, but Qin Yuru not only wanted to refuse the marriage, but also wanted to ruin her reputation. She wanted to use her loss of reputation to dilute the scandal of Qin Yuru's loss of reputation. With the premise that Qin Yuru didn't want to marry Qi Tianyu, the fall into the lake was naturally blamed on Qin Yuru. At this time, Qi Rongji didn't want to tolerate it anymore. She walked to the table, picked up a bowl of hot porridge on the table, and threw it at Qin Yuru. Coincidentally, Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru were very close at this time. Qi Rongji originally wanted to throw the bowl of porridge in between them. It would be better if the bowl of porridge could ruin the faces of these 2 bitches. Seeing Qi Rongji walk to the table, Qin Wanru knew it was not good. She hurriedly retreated to the side and pulled up her right sleeve to one side. Even so, a few drops of porridge splashed on her right hand, which she used to block. She couldn't help but cry out in pain. In fact, Qin Yuru was also watching Qi Rongji's action. When she saw Qi Rongji pick up the bowl, she also knew it was not good. But she realized it a little late. The bowl of porridge had already smashed in the direction of her shoulder. She tried to avoid it and subconsciously blocked it with her hand. A small part of the bowl of hot porridge fell into her palm. Ah! Qin Yuru screamed and fell immediately. The bowl of porridge fell at her feet, and a few drops splashed on her face. Mei Shui screamed and rushed to Qin Yuru. Miss, are you okay?" At this time, Qin Yuru was in so much pain that she couldn't even speak. She swung her palm back with force, and the porridge slipped from her palm. But even so, a large part of her palm was scalded, and it was as red as blood. Help! Miss Qi hurt first Miss's hand. Mei Shui shouted. "Oh, you can't blame me for this." Seeing Qin Wanru avoid it, Qi Rongji felt very unhappy. She snorted and wanted to push the blame to Qin Wanru, but she was interrupted by Qin Wanru. "Someone, hold first Miss Qi, lest she hurt first Miss again." There were other servant girls in the room, and they were shocked by Qi Rongji just now. At this time, after hearing Qin Wanru's words, they came to their senses. Immediately, 2 servant girls came over and held Qi Rongji's hand tightly, not letting her move. Qi Rongji's servant girl, Chun Yi, wanted to go forward, but was stopped by another servant girl. Qin Yuru had an accident in her room, and all the servant girls in the room were frightened. Since first Miss had an accident, no one could bear the responsibility. At this time, of course, they must hold the culprit tightly, in case they couldn't explain it later. "Qin Wanru, how dare you?" Qi Rongji didn't expect that Qin Wanru would let her be held without saying anything. She was immediately furious, and tried to struggle a few times. After failing to break free, she shouted angrily. It was too late for her to defend herself. "Go and tell Madam that first Miss Qi hurt first Miss, and ask for a doctor." Qin Wanru didn't care about Qi Rongji, and ordered 2 old maids to come over. Qin Yuru's servants were at a loss. Hearing Qin Wanru's words, the 2 old maids immediately ran out. "Qin Wanru, how dare you? Let me go!" Qi Rongji screamed and wriggled. She yelled at the two maids who were holding her, "Are you deaf or blind? How dare you pull me? First Miss Chi, they are not deaf or blind. They know where we are, and they know that First Miss Chi hurt my big sister just now. Is the Chi's mansion so stubborn about the matter with our mansion? Do you want to repay my big sister in this way?" Qin Wanru scolded coldly. "What do you mean by stubborn? It's your mansion's fault first. Qin Yuru is a bitch, and I don't know which man she hooked up with. She made my big brother wear a green hat and lose his face. She thinks it's okay. How can there be such a good thing in this world?" Qi Rongji was so angry with Qin Wanru that she jumped. She glared at Qin Wanru and screamed. Her words were involuntarily carried by Qin Wanru. "The matter between my big sister and the first young master of the Qi family has been resolved, and the parents of the two families didn't say anything. Who is First Miss Qi helping to vent her anger and make such a scene? If this spreads out, no one will dare to marry First Miss Qi," Qin Wanru said coldly. Her words seemed to be defending Qin Yuru. Qi Rongji became angrier when she heard this. She spat at Qin Wanru and struggled hard. "What a lousy thing. You have a child with another man, and you still want to be with my big brother. My big brother doesn't want other people's women." Qi Rongji was usually shrewish. When she was angry, she dared to say anything. She felt that Qin Yuru had dumped her big brother, and her big brother had lost his face. She simply talked about what her big brother had said before. At least in this way, her big brother didn't want Qin Yuru, who had made him a green hat. "Look at the things in this room. Many of them are gifts from that man. Qin Yuru, how can you be so shameless? You are engaged to my big brother, and at the same time, you are with another man. You are so cheap, and someone still wants you. Who else should I smash if not you?" Qi Rongji scolded. At this time, she had forgotten that she originally wanted to drag this matter onto Qin Wanru. At this time, Mei Shui had helped Qin Yuru to sit on the side. She anxiously wiped the porridge on Qin Yuru's hand and face with a cloth. There were a few red spots on Qin Yuru's face. They didn't look big, but they were so big on her hand that she couldn't touch them. Qin Yuru was in so much pain that she burst into tears. The excruciating pain made her gnash her teeth in hatred towards Qi Rongji. She endured the pain in her hand, stood up, and slapped Qi Rongji, who was held aside by the maid, hard and unable to move. Because she hated Qi Rongji so much, Qin Yuru didn't pretend this time. She slapped Qi Rongji so hard that her head tilted to the side. Qi Rongji's face immediately became red and swollen. "Bitch, how dare you hit me?" Qi Rongji was stunned for a moment. Then she jumped up and kicked Qin Yuru with both feet. She had never suffered such a big loss. She screamed and kicked Qin Yuru. Qin Yuru couldn't stand such a strong kick. Her legs went soft, and her body fell backward. The servant girls were stunned when they saw the two suddenly fight. They watched Qi Rongji get hit, and now they saw Qin Yuru's body hit the chair on the side, and then she fell with the chair. This time, Qin Yuru fainted directly without making a sound. "Qi Rongji, you are too much. How dare you hit big sister and make her faint? Your magistrate has gone too far." Qin Wanru took a step forward angrily and reached out to push Qi Rongji. However, because of her anger, her hand deviated and hit the fleshy part of Qi Rongji's chest near her arm. Qin Wanru pinched the fleshy part hard. Chapter 39. Qin Wanru had prepared for this and hid behind several servant girls beside her. Seeing that Qi Rongji was still being aggressive, the maids rushed forward to stop her. However, Qi Rongji had just suffered a painful blow, so she rushed forward like a madwoman and slapped the maids away. The maids did not dare to really hurt her, so they could only step back again and again. A few of the maids were beaten up. Qin Wanru retreated to the door. Hearing footsteps coming from outside the door, she sneered at Qi Rongji, who rushed to her again, and retreated to the door quickly. Madame D hurried over with her servant girls and old maids. Seeing Qin Wanru stepping out of the door, she ignored her and was about to enter the room. Qin Wanru's provocation almost drove Qi Rongji crazy. She rushed out and saw someone blocking the door. Thinking that it was another servant girl blocking the way, she raised her hand and slapped her hard twice. She scolded harshly, "Bitch, get out of my way," and beat the hell out of him. A push. Madame D was stunned. Before she could react, she was pushed out of the room. Fortunately, the maid behind her was quick to catch her. She was stunned for a moment, then became furious. She pointed at Qi Rongji, who was also stunned, and said loudly, "Catch this shrew. It doesn't matter if she is injured or killed." Madame D was furious. Before she arrived, she heard the servant report that Qi Rongji had poured a bowl of hot porridge on Qin Yuru. Qin Yuru was scalded. Madame D rushed over anxiously and was slapped twice by Qi Rongji. When Qi Rongji saw that the person she hit was Madame D, she knew she was in trouble. She did not dare to make a scene and was immediately restrained by the maids and old maids who rushed over. "Madame D, what did my daughter do? How could you, an elder, call her a shrew? She is just a child." A cold rebuke came from behind the crowd, who were in a mess. The people from Magistrate Qi's residence who were notified by old mistress had also arrived. Hearing this voice, Qi Rongji immediately burst into tears. Mother, they want to ruin my reputation, they want to hurt me." "What? Madame D, why did you destroy my son and daughter again and again?" Magistrate Qi's wife, Madame Li, had just arrived at the entrance of the courtyard. When she heard her daughter's cries and then looked at her daughter, whose clothes were in a mess, she immediately became angry. She came a little late, so she didn't see Qi Rongji slap Madame D twice. She only saw her daughter being caught by the servants and messed up. She didn't look like a daughter of an aristocratic family at all. "Mrs. Li, you came at the right time. Your daughter scalded Yuru with a bowl of porridge and slapped me twice. How are you going to settle this account? If such a person is not a shrew, then what is she? You're already so old and about to get engaged, yet you're still considered a child." Madame D was also furious. Those 2 slaps had completely disgraced her. How could she say anything nice at this time? Qin Wanru calmly looked at these 2 people who were arguing angrily. A trace of sneer flashed in her big black eyes and frost condensed in the bottom of her eyes. In the past, when Qi Rongji hit her or accidentally hurt her, these 2 people would scramble to be the first to realize that Qi Rongji was just a child. This kind of thing was not a big deal, and it made Grandma unable to help her even if she wanted to. Once Qin Yuru was hit, Qi Rongji became a shrew. Pouring porridge on others and hitting Madame D, even if Qi Rongji wanted to push the blame to her, it was already impossible. Originally, she was thinking about how to make the 2 families distant from each other and prevent Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji from colluding with each other. Now that Qi Rongji, the idiot, came to her door, wasn't it just right? "What, Rongji, did you really burn Qin Yuru?" Hearing what Madame D said, Madame Li also felt that things were not going well, so she quickly turned her head and asked. "Mother, I did that because they schemed against me first. They wanted to ruin my reputation to offset the loss of Qin Yuru's reputation. Mother, they actually caused me to fall into the lake and even wanted to find a man to save me. They ruined my reputation." Qi Rongji cried pitifully as she explained. "Madame D, my son wanted to marry your daughter, but your daughter made my son a cuckold. Now, the whole Jiangzhou prefecture is gossiping about him, but you still think it's not enough and want to ruin my daughter's reputation. Fine, we are not worthy of the general's mansion. From now on, we will break all ties with the general's mansion." Hearing Qi Rongji's words, Madame Li was so angry that she almost vomited blood. Originally, the matter between Qi Tianyu and Qin Yuru had been stuck in her heart. Although her son explained that Qin Yuru was also framed, Madame Li did not believe him. They were all women in the backyard, and Madame Li could see through Qin Yuru's tricks at a glance. It was just that her silly son did not know who she was. General's mansion had always been controlled by Madame D. It was obvious that Qin Wanru was not favored at first glance. As for Shui Rulan, she was indifferent and usually did not go out. How could she plot against Qin Yuru and put a box in Qin Yuru's room that showed her having an affair with someone else? Furthermore, if the box was really placed in her room by someone else, how could the letter inside be so real? This was obviously Qin Yuru's excuse to deceive others. Madame Li, what nonsense are you talking about? When did we harm your daughter? It was obviously Miss Qi who did something wrong and deliberately tried to shirk the responsibility. If something really happened to my daughter, I will never let you off. Madame D was also angered by Qi Rongji's words, and she stared at Madame Li with red eyes. She felt that Qi Rongji's words were all nonsense. It was obvious that she was guilty and spilled the porridge on Qin Yuru. If Qin Yuru was really hurt, this matter would not be over. At this moment, Madame Li did not want to say anything more to Madame D. She waved her hand and said to the people beside her, "Go and take Miss Qi away, we will not come back again." Immediately, 2 servant girls and old women from the magistrate's mansion came over and pushed away the hand of the servant girl who was holding Qi Rongji. As soon as Qi Rongji's hand loosened, she threw herself at Madame Li and burst into tears. "Let's go." Madame Li turned around angrily and carried her daughter away. Qi Rongji was carried by Madame Li, and when she turned around, she saw Qin Wanru. She wanted to say something, but Madame Li brought her out directly. Looking at the people of Qi's mansion taking Qi Rongji away, Madame D could not care about her anymore and rushed into the room to check on Qin Yuru. At this time, the doctor also happened to come, and a large group of people rushed into the inner room. Outside the courtyard, only Qin Wanru and Qin Yu were left. Qin Wanru exhaled softly and looked at the back of the people of Magistrate Qi's mansion quietly. Qi Rongji brought her here today with bad intentions. She wanted to push the responsibility of the accident to her, but now the matter was too big, and Qi Rongji could not shirk it even if she wanted to. The corner of her lips curled up silently. She turned her watery eyes and suddenly met a pair of handsome eyes that were full of interest, and the corner of her lips immediately stiffened. In the pavilion opposite Qin Wanru, Chu Luchen was really leaning against the window there. His snow-white robe reflected his jade-like face, his eyes were shimmering, and the space between his eyebrows was even more picturesque, elegant like a fairy. He leaned against the window leisurely, and it was obvious that he had been watching for a long time. His somewhat careless gaze fell on Qin Wanru's face, and his lips curled up into a smile. Qin Wanru secretly complained. She thought it was just a joke, but she did not expect that this prince was really so free that he actually came to watch such a scene. She had no choice but to slightly bow in that direction, and then sneak into the room with Qin Yu. This prince gave her too much pressure. In the room, Qin Yuru had already been helped to the bed, and the traces of porridge on her body had been wiped clean. The doctor was treating her injury. "What's wrong? How is my daughter?" Madame D asked nervously. Looking at her daughter like this, she felt distressed and began to cry. "Madam, I'm afraid that the injury on her hand is more serious. It's not very big on her face, but she still needs to rest well, otherwise it will leave a scar in the future." The doctor frowned and said. "Then what about this hand? What about this hand?" Madame D looked at Qin Yuru's red palm with a big blister, and her face was as white as snow. "This hand. I'm afraid it will definitely leave a scar," the doctor said helplessly. There was such a big burn on her hand, and a big blister had already grown. Her entire palm was almost red, almost transparent, and it made people's hearts tremble. "This injury is too serious. I can't do anything about it. Is there no other way? Is there any other way?" Madame D said in despair. The body of a girl was so delicate, and such a big scar on her hand would be despised. She was the one who wanted to be with her maiden family, so how could she allow anything to happen to Chinuru at this time? There really is no other way. Perhaps there might be a good scar cream in the palace, and it might be useful. The doctor really had no other way, but seeing that Madame D was so anxious, he could only give an uncertain idea. The palace, the cream in the palace? Madame D was so anxious that she was in a circle. Where could she find the cream in the palace? Madam, do you want to ask Duke Yong's mansion in the capital city? Maybe Duke Yong's mansion has the cream from the palace? Nanny Zhou, who was beside Madame D, reminded her. Yes, write a letter immediately. Duke Yong's mansion has always been favored by the emperor, so there should be some cream from the palace. Madame D's eyes immediately lit up. She stood up and turned to walk out. She had to write a letter to ask for the cream as soon as possible. When she walked to the door, Qin Wanru happened to walk in, and bowed to her sideways. Mother, how is big sister? Your big sister is very good, nothing happened. Madame D stood still, looked up and sneered. It's good that she is fine, then I'll go and report to Grandma, so she doesn't have to worry. Qin Wanru said softly, as if she did not hear that Madame D's words were said out of anger. Then she turned around and left with Qin Yu, and did not go in to see Qin Yuru again. Madame D was so angry that her whole body was trembling, and she almost could not control herself from going up to Qin Wanru and giving her 2 slaps. But she had also asked just now, and this matter had nothing to do with Qin Wanru, and it was caused by Qi Rongji suddenly going crazy. The reason why Qi Rongji did this was of course because she was angry about the annulment of the engagement between Qin Yuru and Qi Tianyu, so she deliberately came to make trouble. At this time, Madame D also regretted. If she had known that Qi Rongji would cause such trouble, she would not have let Qi Rongji marry into the family. But it was useless to regret now. She could only clench her teeth and stare at Qin Wanru's back viciously. When Yuru's matter was settled, she would find time to deal with this bitch. She was actually watching the show from the side, and did not help her sister to stop Qi Rongji. Why was this bitch so lucky that she did not burn her face? You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.